In the long silence that followed the Great War, humanity did not vanish. It gathered itself slowly, cautiously, around places that still offered shelter, water, memory, or meaning. From shattered stadiums and buried vaults to rusted ships and irradiated towns, settlements emerged as quiet answers to an unlivable world. Each was shaped by fear, hope, ideology, and geography, becoming more than simple refuges. They became experiments in survival, order, belief, and power. Tonight, we move gently through these places, not as destinations, but as stories layered over centuries, revealing how civilization endured by rebuilding itself, piece by fragile piece, enduring. Long before the first siren sounded and the sky burned white, the fate of post-war settlements was already being shaped by choices made in concrete, steel, and zoning maps. The pre-war world built itself around efficiency, density, and permanence, never imagining that these same qualities would determine who survived and where humanity would regroup after annihilation. Cities expanded upward and outward, threading themselves with highways, rail lines, power grids, and water systems that assumed uninterrupted maintenance and endless stability. When that stability vanished, these structures did not disappear. They remained broken but present, offering the foundations upon which the future would quietly gather. Urban centers became magnets for survival, not because they were safe, but because they contained remnants of order. Stadiums, office towers, subway tunnels, and industrial plants had been designed to hold large numbers of people, store resources, and withstand stress. Fenway Park, Rivet City's aircraft carrier, the concrete canyons of downtown districts, and the buried transit systems beneath ruined cities all shared a common trait. They were already meant to endure pressure. After the bombs fell, that endurance took on new meaning. Walls that once kept out weather now kept out raiders. Platforms meant for crowds became markets. Suburban developments told a quieter story. Neighborhoods like Sanctuary Hills reflected a pre-war belief in safety through uniformity. Identical homes, wide streets, and planned community spaces were designed to foster comfort, not defense. Yet their locations near industrial plants, military installations, or vault entrances unintentionally placed them at the edges of survival corridors. When residents fled or were erased, these suburbs became ghostly frameworks that later settlers would repurpose, scavenging both materials and memories from places that once promised permanence. Industrial zones played an even more decisive role. Factories, shipyards, and power plants had been constructed with redundancy, reinforced structures, and independent energy systems. After the war, these sites often remained standing when residential areas did not. Their ruins attracted survivors seeking tools, machinery, and shelter. Over time, many evolved into fortified settlements or trade hubs, their original purpose forgotten as new economies grew around salvage and repair. The bones of industry became the scaffolding of survival. Transportation networks quietly dictated movement and settlement patterns. Highways and rail lines, once symbols of connection, became pathways of danger and opportunity. Settlements that formed near major routes benefited from trade and information flow, but also faced constant threat from raiders and wandering creatures. Those farther from these arteries often survived through isolation, trading safety for scarcity. The placement of a road or bridge could determine whether a settlement grew into a hub or faded into obscurity. Vault entrances represented another pre-war legacy that reshaped the wasteland, built according to hidden criteria rather than community needs. Vaults were often located near population centers, but offset just enough to avoid attention. After the war, these sealed doors became focal points of rumor and hope. Some vaults released populations that would found new towns. Others remained closed, their surrounding areas shaped by speculation, fear, or the slow realization that no one inside would ever emerge. Even unopened, vaults influenced settlement patterns, acting as landmarks around which stories accumulated. Military installations left a particularly heavy imprint. Air Force bases, checkpoints, and research facilities were designed for defense and secrecy, and their ruins retained both qualities. Settlements that formed near these sites often inherited their martial character, organizing around security, discipline, and weaponry. Others avoided them entirely, wary of unexploded ordnance, radiation, or the attention such places drew. The presence of a pre-war bunker or armory could shape a community's identity for generations. Water infrastructure quietly determined everything. Reservoirs, purification plants, and underground pipelines dictated which locations could support long-term habitation. Settlements clustered around rivers, treatment facilities, and intact pumping stations, often without fully understanding how fragile these systems were. When a pump failed or a river became too irradiated, entire communities were forced to move or collapse. The pre-war assumption that clean water would always flow became one of the harshest lessons of the New World. Cultural landmarks carried a different kind of weight. Museums, churches, schools, and stadiums embodied memory rather than utility. Survivors gravitated toward them not only for shelter, but for familiarity. A place once filled with crowds and shared purpose offered psychological stability in a world defined by loss. Over time, these locations became symbolic centers, anchoring settlements to a past that no longer existed but was not yet forgotten. The layout of pre-war cities also shaped power. Dense urban cores encouraged centralized authority, while sprawling outskirts fostered fragmentation. Where space was limited, governance emerged quickly, often enforced by necessity. Where land stretched outward, settlements remained loosely connected, relying on personal relationships rather than formal institutions. These patterns echoed pre-war planning philosophies, persisting long after the philosophies themselves had died. Even failure followed pre-war lines. Cities built without redundancy collapsed faster. Neighborhoods dependent on a single power source or water line vanished when that system failed. The ruins that dot the wasteland are not random. They are maps of assumptions that no longer held true. Each abandoned block and silent terminal marks a place where the old world's confidence proved misplaced. In this way, the wasteland did not begin from nothing. It inherited a shape, a skeleton formed by centuries of human planning and optimism. Settlements did not rise wherever people happened to survive. They emerged where the past allowed them to, constrained and guided by structures meant for a world that believed itself eternal. Long before humanity began rebuilding, the ground beneath its feet had already decided where that rebuilding could begin. When the world ended above ground, life continued below it in carefully sealed chambers designed not merely to protect, but to observe. Vaults were presented to the public as sanctuaries, marvels of engineering that promised safety, comfort, and continuity. In reality, they became some of the most controlled and unnatural settlements ever created. Their populations shaped by isolation, manipulation, and time. Unlike surface communities that formed through necessity and improvisation, vault communities were planned environments, each governed by rules written long before the first siren ever sounded. Life inside a vault followed a rhythm that felt orderly, even comforting, in the early years. Power remained stable, water flowed clean, food arrived according to schedules calculated decades in advance. Children attended schools that taught them a version of history already frozen in place, while adults performed maintenance, administration, and research tasks meant to preserve internal stability. The absence of weather, radiation, and visible decay gave many vault dwellers the illusion that the outside world was merely paused, waiting to be resumed. Yet, beneath this stability lay tension. Vault populations were finite, their social circles inescapable. Every disagreement, every rivalry, echoed through metal corridors with nowhere to dissipate. Over time, these pressures reshaped vault society. Minor disputes hardened into ideological divisions. Leadership positions became sources of resentment. The same walls that protected vault residents also amplified every social fracture. Many vaults were never intended to function as long-term settlements at all. Some were designed to test obedience, others deprivation, isolation, overcrowding, or psychological stress. These experiments transformed vault life into something closer to captivity than refuge. In vaults, where resources were deliberately restricted or systems were programmed to fail, survival depended not on cooperation alone, but on adaptability to artificial scarcity. The resulting societies often emerged warped, carrying behavioral scars that would follow them long after vault doors were breached. Time itself behaved differently underground. Without seasons or sky, years blurred together. Generations were raised, knowing the vault as the only world that existed. For them, the surface became an abstraction, described in lessons and archived footage rather than lived experience. This separation produced cultures that were highly structured but emotionally insulated, where tradition replaced exploration and routine replaced curiosity. When vaults remained sealed for centuries, their inhabitants developed norms and values increasingly disconnected from surface humanity. Eventually, every functioning vault faced the same question: stay sealed or open the door. For some, the decision came through mechanical failure or dwindling supplies. For others, it arrived as curiosity or desperation. When vault doors finally opened, the result was rarely seamless integration. Vault dwellers emerged into a world that no longer resembled the one they had been taught about. Their clean clothing, unscarred bodies, and structured speech marked them as outsiders in a wasteland shaped by struggle. The settlements that formed from vault populations reflected this divide. Some vault survivors attempted to recreate controlled environments above ground, building communities with strict rules, regulated access, and rigid hierarchies. Vault City stood as the clearest example, its obsession with purity and order mirroring the controlled conditions of vault life. These settlements often valued genetic health, medical knowledge, and technological superiority, while viewing surface dwellers as contaminated or inferior. Other vault-born communities fractured upon exposure to the wasteland. Without the vault structure to contain them, residents struggled to adapt. Skills that mattered underground held little value in irradiated ruins. Vault dwellers who could not learn to scavenge, trade, or defend themselves quickly were absorbed into existing settlements or vanished entirely. In these cases, the vault served less as a seed of civilization and more as a temporary shelter that delayed, rather than prevented, collapse. Some vaults never released their populations at all. Mechanical failure, internal conflict, or experimental design led to extinction behind sealed doors. These vaults became silent settlements, their interiors preserved like tombs. When discovered centuries later, they offered glimpses into alternate outcomes, societies that might have emerged but never did. The remains of these communities influenced nearby settlements indirectly through scavenged technology, cautionary stories, or the quiet reminder that survival was never guaranteed. Vaults also shaped the wasteland through rumor. Even unopened, they occupied a powerful place in post-war imagination. Stories of untouched technology, preserved knowledge, and pure humans circulated widely. Settlements formed near vaults hoping to trade, raid, or one day gain access. Others avoided them entirely, fearing whatever had gone wrong inside. In this way, vaults influenced settlement patterns without ever opening, acting as anchors for speculation and conflict. The psychological legacy of vault life extended far beyond physical locations. Vault dwellers carried with them a belief in systems, procedures, and authority. Accustomed to oversight and schedules, they often struggled with the ambiguity of surface life. where rules shifted with circumstance and power belonged to whoever could enforce it. This tension played out in interactions between vault-founded settlements and wasteland communities, creating misunderstandings that sometimes escalated into violence. Over generations, vault-origin settlements evolved. The initial distinction between vault-born and surface-born faded, replaced by hybrid cultures shaped by both controlled beginnings and harsh adaptation. Yet, traces of vault life remained visible in governance structures, architecture, and attitudes toward technology. Even centuries later, one could often identify a vault-descended settlement by its emphasis on planning, documentation, and internal order. Not all vault influence was negative. Vaults preserved scientific knowledge, medical techniques, and engineering skills that might otherwise have been lost entirely. Some settlements benefited greatly from this inheritance, becoming centers of healing, education, or technological advancement. In these cases, the vault fulfilled its public promise, not as a shelter from the war, but as a reservoir of knowledge released slowly into a broken world. In the end, vault communities were neither saviors nor villains. They were controlled experiments placed into an uncontrolled apocalypse. Their successes and failures shaped the wasteland in uneven ways, creating pockets of order alongside deep mistrust. Settlements born from vaults carried the weight of their origins, marked by the paradox of having survived the end of the world while remaining unprepared for the one that followed. In the arid stretches of what had once been Southern California, a small settlement began that would quietly redefine what survival meant in the post-war world. Shady Sands did not rise from advanced technology or hidden vault systems, but from patience, cooperation, and a willingness to rebuild rather than merely endure. Its origins were modest, rooted in the efforts of vault survivors who emerged not with dreams of dominance, but with an understanding that stability required more than walls and weapons. It required structure, trust, and time. The founders of Shady Sands came from Vault 15, a vault whose population had fractured under ideological strain long before its doors opened. When its inhabitants emerged into the wasteland, they did not arrive as a unified group. Many dispersed, forming raider bands or isolated communities. A smaller number chose a different path, settling near reliable water sources and arable land rather than ruins filled with scavengers and radiation. Their decision reflected a shift away from pre-war assumptions that technology alone guaranteed survival. Early life in Shady Sands revolved around agriculture. Crops were planted cautiously in soil tested through trial rather than instrument. Irrigation channels were dug by hand, guided by observation of seasonal runoff and groundwater behavior. Every harvest represented not just food, but proof that the land could still sustain life if treated with restraint. Unlike settlements dependent on scavenging, Shady Sands invested in renewal, choosing long-term stability over immediate gain. Governance emerged organically. Decisions were made collectively at first, driven by necessity rather than ideology. Leadership roles were assigned based on competence rather than force, with individuals gaining influence through reliability and fairness. This early emphasis on civic responsibility distinguished Shady Sands from many contemporaneous settlements, where authority often belonged to those most capable of violence. In Shady Sands, power was quieter, rooted in consensus and shared interest. Security was necessary, but never dominant. Defensive measures existed, yet they were designed to protect fields and homes rather than project strength outward. Walls were minimal, patrols were limited. The settlement relied on diplomacy and distance as much as arms. This restraint reduced conflict and allowed trade relationships to develop with neighboring communities that might otherwise have viewed a fortified settlement as a threat. Trade slowly expanded Shady Sands' influence. Agricultural surplus allowed for exchange, drawing merchants and travelers who brought news, skills, and ideas. Each interaction widened the settlement's understanding of the broader wasteland. Knowledge accumulated alongside resources, reinforcing the belief that cooperation offered advantages isolation never could. Over time, Shady Sands became a quiet anchor point in a chaotic region. As the population grew, governance evolved. Informal councils gave way to structured leadership, with codified rules replacing ad hoc decisions. Laws were written not to control, but to preserve fairness and predictability. Punishments emphasized restitution over cruelty, reinforcing social cohesion rather than fear. This legal framework encouraged settlement growth, as newcomers found a community where disputes were resolved without arbitrary violence. The transition from settlement to state began subtly. Shady Sands formed alliances with nearby towns, offering protection, trade access, and mediation in exchange for cooperation. Roads were maintained. Messengers traveled regular routes. Agreements were documented and enforced. What began as mutual aid slowly transformed into governance across distance, laying the groundwork for something larger than any single settlement. The formation of the new California Republic was not announced with ceremony. It emerged through necessity as Shady Sands, and its allies recognized that survival at scale required coordination beyond local borders. Shared defense against raiders and slavers demanded organized militias. Trade required standardized systems. Justice required consistency. Each function added another layer to an expanding civic structure. As the Republic grew, its ideals were tested. Expansion brought diversity of culture, belief, and interest. Some settlements joined willingly, drawn by stability and opportunity. Others resisted, fearing loss of autonomy. The Republic's response varied, at times diplomatic, at times forceful. The tension between voluntary unity and imposed order became a defining feature of its development. Shady Sands transformed alongside the Republic. What had once been a farming community became a political center. Administrative buildings rose where fields once stood. Bureaucracy expanded, managing taxation, defense, and infrastructure. The settlement's original simplicity faded, replaced by complexity that mirrored pre-war governance structures. With growth came efficiency, but also distance between leaders and citizens. Military organization evolved in parallel. Citizen militias became standing forces, trained and equipped to defend borders rather than homesteads. While this provided security, it also shifted the Republic's identity. Power became increasingly centralized, and decisions once made by consensus now flowed through hierarchical command. The balance between protection and control grew more fragile with each expansion. Despite these changes, Shady Sands retained symbolic importance. It represented the idea that civilization could be rebuilt without vault secrecy or technological supremacy. Its success demonstrated that cooperation, agriculture, and law could restore order even in a broken world. This symbolism attracted both admiration and resentment from other factions who viewed the Republic's growth as either salvation or threat. Criticism emerged from within as well. Some citizens questioned whether the Republic had strayed too far from its founding principles. Taxes increased, bureaucratic inefficiencies grew, corruption appeared in administrative ranks. The very systems designed to ensure fairness began to reproduce the inequalities of the old world. Shady Sands, once defined by shared labor, now grappled with class divisions shaped by political proximity and economic influence. Yet, even amid these tensions, the Republic endured. Roads remained open, farms continued to produce, laws were enforced with relative consistency. Compared to the fragmentation surrounding it, the NCR offered predictability, and predictability proved valuable. Settlements under its influence experienced fewer raids, greater trade stability, and access to shared resources that individual communities could not sustain alone. Shady Sands' legacy extended beyond its borders and lifespan as a simple settlement. It became a blueprint, illustrating both the promise and peril of rebuilding civilization at scale. Its rise showed that humanity could recover through cooperation and planning. Its struggles revealed how easily ideals could be compromised once power accumulated. In the wasteland, Shady Sands stands as a reminder that survival is not merely about enduring the present, but about shaping the future. From its fields and council chambers emerged a nation that carried the weight of history forward, proving that even after the world ends, the impulse to organize, govern, and rebuild remains deeply human. Vault City rose from the wasteland with an air of deliberate separation, a settlement shaped not by scarcity or improvisation, but by continuity. Founded by inhabitants of Vault 8, its origins lay in a vault that had functioned largely as intended, preserving not only its population, but also its social systems, technology, and expectations. When its doors opened, the people who stepped into the ruined world did not see chaos as an invitation to adapt. They saw it as contamination to be managed, controlled, and kept at a distance. From its earliest days, Vault City defined itself through order. Streets were laid out with precision, infrastructure maintained according to schedules inherited from Vault life, and access regulated through formal procedures. Unlike surface settlements that evolved organically, Vault City was planned, its growth constrained by rules rather than circumstance. Clean water, medical facilities, and advanced power systems allowed it to achieve a standard of living unmatched by most post-war communities, reinforcing its belief that survival depended on discipline rather than cooperation with outsiders. Central to Vault City's identity was purity. Genetic health became a metric of belonging, measured through medical examinations and residency classifications. Citizens enjoyed full rights and protections, while non-citizens were restricted, monitored, and excluded from decision-making. This distinction was not framed as cruelty, but as necessity. Vault City leadership viewed radiation exposure as an existential threat, one that justified segregation in the name of long-term survival. Over time, this belief hardened into doctrine. Medicine formed the backbone of Vault City's authority. Its hospitals preserved pre-war techniques, pharmaceutical stockpiles, and surgical capabilities that far exceeded those available elsewhere. Outsiders traveled great distances seeking treatment, accepting restrictive conditions in exchange for care. Vault City presented itself as humanitarian, offering healing to the sick, while simultaneously reinforcing its superiority through controlled access. Aid became a tool of influence rather than connection. Governance reflected Vault tradition. Councils operated with procedural rigor, guided by written codes and institutional memory. Decisions were slow but deliberate, emphasizing stability over responsiveness. Citizens were accustomed to oversight, inspections, and documentation, viewing these measures as safeguards rather than intrusions. For outsiders, however, Vault City's bureaucracy felt cold and impersonal, a system more concerned with maintaining internal order than addressing external suffering. The settlement's relationship with neighboring communities was transactional. Trade occurred, but always under Vault City's terms. Technology and medical supplies flowed outward in limited quantities, exchanged for raw materials or labor. These arrangements reinforced dependency while preserving Vault City's autonomy. Unlike Shady Sands, which sought integration, Vault City remained deliberately insular, engaging with the wasteland only when necessary. This isolation shaped its culture. Education emphasized science, hygiene, and civic duty, preparing citizens to maintain existing systems rather than innovate socially. History was taught selectively, focusing on vault preservation and the failures of surface civilization. Children grew up internalizing the idea that survival required separation, that the outside world was inherently unstable and dangerous. Curiosity about the wasteland was discouraged, framed as a liability rather than a virtue. Yet this rigidity came at a cost. Vault City's refusal to adapt socially limited its growth. Population remained controlled, expansion cautious. While other settlements absorbed newcomers and diversified, Vault City remained static, its demographic profile tightly managed. This stability prevented internal collapse but also created stagnation, leaving the settlement vulnerable to changes it could not control. Tensions with the new California Republic highlighted these limitations. As the NCR expanded, offering protection and integration, Vault City faced a choice. Cooperation promised security and access to wider trade networks, but threatened its autonomy and purity doctrine. Resistance preserved identity but risked isolation in a region increasingly governed by collective authority. Negotiations reflected mutual suspicion, each side viewing the other as fundamentally flawed. Within Vault City, dissent existed quietly. Some citizens questioned the ethics of exclusion, particularly as evidence mounted that cooperation improved regional stability. Medical professionals struggled with the moral weight of denying care or citizenship based on exposure rather than character. These doubts rarely surfaced publicly, constrained by cultural norms that equated unity with survival. Change, when it came, arrived slowly and often through external pressure rather than internal reform. Vault City's reliance on technology also proved double-edged. While advanced systems sustained comfort and health, they required maintenance and expertise that grew harder to guarantee over time. As pre-war components degraded and replacements became scarce, the settlement faced challenges that could not be solved through policy alone. Adaptation required flexibility, a trait Vault City had systematically minimized. Interactions with wasteland communities revealed another vulnerability. Outsiders perceived Vault City not as a beacon, but as an enclave of privilege. Resentment grew among those excluded from its protections, particularly when Vault City benefited from regional stability without contributing proportionally to its defense. This perception isolated the settlement politically, limiting alliances and support during periods of tension. Despite these challenges, Vault City endured. Its clean streets and orderly institutions stood in stark contrast to the chaos beyond its borders. For many, it represented what humanity might preserve if discipline triumphed over desperation. For others, it embodied the dangers of survival without empathy, a reminder that rebuilding civilization required more than technology and rules. Over time, Vault City became less a model to follow and more a case study. It demonstrated the strengths of preservation and the weaknesses of inflexibility. Its survival proved that controlled environments could endure in a hostile world, but its limitations showed that isolation carried its own risks. The wasteland changed constantly, shaped by migration, conflict, and adaptation. Vault City remained largely the same, protected by walls both physical and ideological. In the broader history of post-war settlements, Vault City occupies a distinct place. It did not seek to rule, convert, or expand aggressively. Instead, it sought to remain untouched, preserving a version of humanity defined by order and cleanliness. Whether this represented wisdom or fear remained an open question, one answered differently by each generation that encountered its gates. Vault City's legacy lies not in conquest or influence, but in contrast. It stands as a reminder that survival can take many forms, and that the choices made in the name of safety shape not only who lives, but how they live. In a world rebuilt from ruin, Vault City chose preservation over transformation, carrying the Vault's philosophy into the open air, and discovering that walls, once breached, could never fully keep the world out. New Reno emerged from the ruins without illusions of virtue. Where other settlements sought stability through order or tradition, New Reno embraced indulgence, power, and ambition as its organizing principles. Built atop the remnants of a pre-war city already shaped by vice and entertainment, it inherited both the physical infrastructure and the cultural disposition that would define its future. In the wasteland, where morality often bent beneath survival, New Reno chose not to pretend otherwise. It simply acknowledged desire and built a system around it. From its earliest days, New Reno functioned as a city of opportunity for those willing to take risks. gambling halls reopened amid collapsed streets. Makeshift casinos operated by candlelight and generator hums, offering distraction and profit in equal measure. These establishments were more than entertainment venues. They were economic engines, drawing travelers, traders, mercenaries, and drifters into a dense urban environment where caps changed hands rapidly and information flowed just as freely. Power in New Reno never belonged to a single authority. Instead, it fractured into competing families, each controlling territory, resources, and loyalty through a mixture of wealth, intimidation, and strategic alliances. The Mordinos, Wrights, Bishops, and Salvatores formed the backbone of the city's political structure, their rivalries shaping daily life more than any written law. Each family operated its own enterprises, from casinos and prostitution rings to drug manufacturing and weapons trafficking. Governance was informal, enforced through reputation rather than legislation. This fragmentation created instability, but also resilience. When one family weakened, another expanded to fill the gap. Violence was frequent but calculated, rarely allowed to spiral into chaos that would threaten overall profitability. New Reno understood a truth many settlements ignored. Stability did not require peace. It required balance. The economy of New Reno thrived on vice because vice was reliable. Gambling, chems, and entertainment provided escapism for a population living under constant threat elsewhere. Unlike agriculture, which depended on soil and weather, or manufacturing, which required sustained infrastructure, vice adapted easily to scarcity. It required only people, desire, and opportunity. New Reno had all three in abundance. Chems played a central role in the city's influence. Production and distribution networks extended far beyond its borders, feeding addiction across the wasteland. This trade generated enormous wealth and leverage. Settlements that relied on New Reno's supply chains became dependent, their leaders forced into uneasy relationships that eroded autonomy. Addiction created demand, and demand created control, binding distant communities to New Reno's economy without formal conquest. Social stratification in New Reno was visible but fluid. Wealth brought protection, comfort, and influence, but fortunes changed quickly. A successful gambler could rise overnight, only to fall just as fast. This volatility attracted those who believed themselves capable of bending chance to their will. It also consumed them, reinforcing a culture that valued daring over prudence. In New Reno, ambition was currency, and caution was often mistaken for weakness. Unlike settlements that defined citizenship through contribution or purity, New Reno defined belonging through participation. Anyone could find a place, provided they offered something of value. This inclusivity was pragmatic rather than compassionate. The city absorbed outcasts, criminals, and wanderers, not to redeem them, but to exploit their potential. In doing so, it became a magnet for those excluded elsewhere, swelling its population and diversifying its culture. Law enforcement existed, but it served power rather than justice. Enforcers answered to families, not ideals. Disputes were resolved through negotiation or elimination, depending on stakes and leverage. This system discouraged random violence while enabling targeted brutality. Outsiders often misinterpreted New Reno as lawless, failing to see the intricate codes governing behavior. Break the unwritten rules, and consequences followed swiftly. Technology in New Reno was unevenly distributed. Advanced weapons and pre-war artifacts circulated among elites, while the majority relied on scavenged equipment. This disparity reinforced hierarchy, but also fueled aspiration. Access to better tools meant access to influence. As a result, technological knowledge became another commodity, traded and stolen alongside caps and chems. Despite its reputation, New Reno contributed to wasteland stability in subtle ways. Its information networks transmitted news faster than caravans alone, Many settlements relied on New Reno indirectly, even as they condemned its excesses. This hypocrisy underscored the city's importance. It was easier to criticize vice than to replace the services it provided. New Reno's relationship with emerging powers like the new California Republic was cautious and transactional. The Republic represented order and law, concepts that threatened the city's autonomy. At the same time, the NCR offered protection and legitimacy that could benefit trade. New Reno navigated this tension carefully, avoiding outright opposition while resisting integration. Cooperation occurred when profitable, resistance when necessary. Culturally, New Reno developed its own identity, one that celebrated excess and cunning. Stories of legendary gamblers, crime bosses, and dramatic downfalls circulated widely, reinforcing myths that blurred truth and exaggeration. These narratives served a purpose. They attracted newcomers, maintained morale, and framed survival as a game rather than a burden. In a wasteland defined by loss, New Reno offered distraction wrapped in danger. Yet beneath the neon glow and laughter lay fragility. The city depended on constant influx, on people willing to lose as much as they hoped to gain. Addiction hollowed communities. Violence claimed lives that might otherwise have built something enduring. New Reno produced little that could not be consumed. Its prosperity fed on motion, not roots. Over time, this imbalance limited its future. While other settlements invested in infrastructure, education, or agriculture, New Reno remained focused on immediate profit. When external pressures mounted, whether from political expansion or resource scarcity, the city struggled to adapt. Its strengths became constraints, its flexibility a source of instability rather than resilience. Still, New Reno endured longer than many expected. Its capacity to absorb change, reinvent power structures, and exploit desire allowed it to survive in a harsh environment. It did not rebuild civilization. It exploited its absence. In doing so, it carved out a place that reflected a darker aspect of human nature, one that refused to disappear even when the world burned. New Reno stands as a reminder that survival does not always align with virtue. In the wasteland, power often belongs to those who understand desire and fear more than law and hope. While other settlements dreamed of restoring the past or building a better future, New Reno thrived in the present, indifferent to legacy. Its streets told a story not of redemption, but of persistence through indulgence, where civilization survived not by rising above its flaws, but by embracing them without apology. The hub emerged not as a place of refuge or ideology, but as a convergence point. In a wasteland fractured by distance, fear, and scarcity, it became a settlement defined by movement rather than permanence. Long before it gained influence, its location marked it as inevitable. Positioned at the intersection of surviving trade routes, it offered access rather than shelter, opportunity rather than protection. Where others built walls, the hub built connections. Its origins were modest. A cluster of traders and caravan guards began gathering around a pre-war commercial district that had survived the initial devastation better than most. Warehouses, loading docks, and broad streets designed for freight traffic remained usable, if damaged. These structures provided storage, meeting space, and relative safety for those moving goods across the wasteland. Over time, temporary camps became permanent establishments, and the hub took shape without formal planning or declaration. Unlike agricultural settlements, the hub did not rely on the land. It relied on exchange. Food, water, weapons, medicine, and information passed through its markets in steady flow. Caravans arrived from distant regions, each carrying fragments of the wasteland's scattered resources. It could not afford allegiance to any single faction, because its strength lay in being useful to all. This neutrality became doctrine. Merchants were protected regardless of origin. Conflicts were discouraged not through moral appeals, but through economic consequence. Violence disrupted trade, and disruption threatened everyone. Over time, an informal system of enforcement developed, driven by merchant consensus rather than centralized authority. Those who endangered commerce found themselves excluded, their access to trade networks quietly severed. The rise of the caravan companies marked the hub's transformation from settlement to institution. Organized trading groups such as the Fargo Traders and Crimson Caravan established permanent offices, employing guards, accountants, and negotiators. These organizations standardized routes, schedules, and pricing, reducing uncertainty in a world defined by unpredictability. Their operations extended far beyond the hub's borders, but their headquarters anchored the settlement's importance. Currency became central to this system. Bottle caps emerged not through decree, but practicality. Durable, recognizable, and difficult to counterfeit, they facilitated exchange across regions where trust was scarce. The hub played a critical role in legitimizing this currency by accepting, storing, and redistributing it at scale. In doing so, it stabilized trade relationships that might otherwise have collapsed under barter inefficiency. Information flowed alongside goods. Caravans carried news of emerging settlements, shifting alliances, and dangerous territories. The hub became a clearinghouse for this knowledge, its taverns and markets serving as informal intelligence centers. Merchants learned which roads were safe, which towns were starving, and which leaders could be trusted. This accumulation of information granted the hub influence disproportionate to its size. Social structure within the hub reflected its purpose. Status derived from reliability rather than lineage or force. Successful traders commanded respect not because they ruled territory, but because others depended on them. This meritocratic tendency distinguished the hub from settlements dominated by ideology or violence. Wealth mattered, but reputation mattered more. A trader known for fair dealing held more power than one who relied on intimidation. Security in the hub was pragmatic. Guards protected caravans and marketplaces, but enforcement remained limited. The settlement avoided standing armies or aggressive patrols, understanding that overt militarization would signal partiality. Instead, it relied on deterrence through mutual interest. Threaten the hub, and trade routes would close, supplies would dry up, isolation would follow. This system proved remarkably resilient. While raiders plagued roads and extorted isolated settlements, they rarely targeted the hub directly. Its markets were too valuable, its retaliation too far-reaching. Even groups hostile to trade depended on its goods indirectly. In this way, the hub exerted control without conquest, shaping behavior through access rather than force. Relations with larger powers required careful navigation. The new California Republic viewed the hub as both asset and risk. Its economic strength supported regional stability, but its independence challenged centralized authority. Negotiations focused on mutual benefit. The Republic needed supplies and logistics. The hub needed protection from overreach. Their relationship remained cooperative but cautious, each side aware that dependence could become leverage. Culturally, the hub developed a practical ethos. Ideology held little sway in its markets. Belief systems mattered only insofar as they affected reliability. This pragmatism fostered tolerance. Ghouls, outsiders, and wanderers found space within the hub if they contributed to trade. Prejudice existed, but it rarely overrode profit. In a world where survival demanded flexibility, the hub embraced adaptability, yet this focus carried limitations. The hub produced little of its own. Its prosperity depended on the health of external settlements. When harvests failed or conflicts disrupted supply routes, the hub suffered alongside its partners. It could redistribute scarcity, but not eliminate it. This vulnerability reminded its residents that connection was both strength and risk. Over time, internal tensions emerged. Wealth concentrated among major caravan companies, creating disparities between merchants and laborers. Dock workers, guards, and service providers formed a growing underclass dependent on fluctuating trade volumes. Without formal governance structures, addressing inequality proved difficult. Discontent simmered beneath the surface, occasionally erupting into disputes that threatened stability. Despite these challenges, the hub endured. Its adaptability allowed it to weather changes that destroyed more rigid settlements. As factions rose and fell, the hub remained relevant, adjusting routes and partnerships to new realities. Its identity was not tied to land or ideology, but to function. As long as people needed to exchange goods, the hub had purpose. In the broader story of post-war civilization, the hub represents a different path to survival. It did not rebuild the past or impose order. It facilitated interaction, allowing disparate communities to remain connected without surrendering autonomy. Its influence was subtle, embedded in the daily movement of caps and caravans rather than banners or laws. The hub's legacy lies in demonstrating that civilization can persist through cooperation without central control. It showed that trust could be built incrementally through repeated exchange rather than shared belief. In a wasteland defined by fragmentation, the hub proved that connection itself could be a form of stability, binding the broken world together one transaction at a time. Necropolis began as a contradiction, where most settlements sought to distance themselves from radiation. This one existed because of it. Formed from the remains of Bakersfield and its surrounding infrastructure, Necropolis became a haven for those whose bodies had been transformed by the Great War rather than destroyed by it. The ghouls who gathered there were survivors of a different kind, preserved by exposure that stripped away flesh while leaving consciousness intact. Their settlement emerged not from planning or ambition, but from exclusion. In the early years after the war, ghouls were scattered across the wasteland, often hiding in ruins or underground systems to avoid hostility from smooth-skinned survivors. Fear and misunderstanding drove them into isolation. Necropolis formed when these individuals began congregating around a functioning water treatment facility, recognizing that survival required cooperation. The presence of clean water allowed the settlement to persist in a region otherwise too hostile for long-term habitation. Life in Necropolis developed around shared experience. Ghouls understood one another in ways no other group could. They shared the pain of decay, the weight of memory, and the knowledge that time no longer moved the same way for them. While surface settlements measured life in generations, Necropolis measured it in endurance. Its residents carried memories of the old world that no longer existed anywhere else, making the settlement a living archive of lost history. Governance in Necropolis was informal, shaped by necessity rather than ideology. Leadership emerged through practicality, with individuals taking responsibility for maintaining infrastructure and managing resources. Authority was respected because it functioned, not because it was enforced. This structure reflected the ghouls' understanding that survival depended on mutual reliance rather than dominance. The water facility at the heart of Necropolis defined its importance and vulnerability. Control of clean water granted the settlement leverage in a dry and irradiated region. Trade with passing travelers provided caps and supplies, allowing Necropolis to maintain a degree of economic relevance. At the same time, the facility made it a target. Raiders and super mutants recognized its value, threatening the settlement's fragile security. Defense in Necropolis was limited. Ghouls, often weakened by centuries of decay, could not match the firepower or numbers of hostile groups. Instead, they relied on obscurity and deterrence. The settlement's reputation as a place of decay discouraged some attackers, while others underestimated its residents, assuming weakness equated to helplessness. This miscalculation occasionally proved fatal for those who ventured too close without caution. Necropolis's relationship with nearby settlements was strained. While its water was valuable, prejudice against ghouls limited cooperation. Many smooth-skinned communities viewed Necropolis as a temporary aberration rather than a legitimate settlement. Trade occurred out of necessity, but trust remained thin. Ghouls learned to expect betrayal or abandonment, reinforcing their isolation. Culturally, Necropolis was defined by memory. Ghouls retained fragments of pre-war identity, recalling families, professions, and cities that had vanished. These memories shaped daily life, influencing language, customs, and values. While some ghouls clung to the past, others sought to move beyond it, focusing on survival rather than nostalgia. This tension created a culture that balanced remembrance with acceptance of irreversible change. Time affected Necropolis differently than other settlements. While human communities experienced turnover through birth and death, Necropolis remained relatively static. Residents endured for decades, even centuries, creating a continuity unmatched elsewhere. This longevity fostered deep bonds, but also stagnation. Without generational change, innovation slowed, and adaptation became more difficult. The settlement's greatest challenge emerged with the arrival of supermutants. Drawn by the water facility, they overwhelmed Necropolis's defenses, demonstrating the limits of endurance without strength. The fall of Necropolis was not immediate, but it was decisive. Many ghouls were killed or scattered, the community fractured by a threat it could not repel alone. In the aftermath, Necropolis ceased to function as a cohesive settlement. Survivors dispersed, some joining other ghoul communities, others retreating deeper into ruins. The water facility, once a symbol of survival, became another contested resource in the wasteland. Necropolis's physical presence faded, but its legacy endured through the ghouls who carried its story elsewhere. Despite its collapse, Necropolis holds lasting significance. It demonstrated that survival could take forms beyond the human norm, challenging assumptions about life, decay, and continuity. It exposed the cost of prejudice, showing how isolation weakened a community already burdened by hardship. At the same time, it revealed the resilience of those who refused to disappear simply because the world no longer recognized them. Necropolis also served as a warning. Resources alone could not guarantee survival without allies. Memory, while valuable, could not replace adaptability. The settlement's endurance was remarkable, but its fragility underscored the importance of cooperation across difference. In a wasteland where unity was rare, Necropolis survived as long as it did through shared experience rather than shared power. In the broader landscape of post-war settlements, Necropolis stands apart. It was neither nation nor trade hub, neither fortress nor experiment. It was a refuge for the unwanted, a place where life persisted in defiance of decay. Its story reminds the wasteland that survival is not always clean, orderly, or easily understood, and that some of the longest enduring communities are those born from exclusion rather than choice. The Boneyard did not rise as a single settlement, but as a fractured expanse of survival scattered across the ruins of Los Angeles, where once a vast metropolitan sprawl had stretched from coast to inland valleys. The Great War left behind a landscape too large and too broken to be reclaimed as one community. Instead, survival took root in pockets, each shaped by the debris, dangers, and opportunities of its immediate surroundings. The Boneyard became not a city reborn, but a mosaic of settlements bound loosely by proximity rather than unity. In the years following the war, survivors gravitated toward recognizable landmarks. Collapsed freeways, civic buildings, and industrial districts provided shelter and salvage. Yet the sheer scale of destruction made centralized organization nearly impossible. Radiation levels varied dramatically from block to block. Some districts remained lethal long after others became habitable. Movement through the ruins required caution, and entire neighborhoods were abandoned simply because reaching them safely demanded more effort than the potential reward. This fragmentation shaped the social fabric of the Boneyard. Communities developed independently, each adopting its own rules, leadership structures, and survival strategies. Some relied on scavenging and trade, others on protection rackets or forced labor. Without a unifying authority, power shifted constantly. Alliances formed and dissolved as circumstances changed, creating an environment where stability was temporary and trust conditional. Among these fractured settlements, the Adytum emerged as a focal point. Built within a fortified area of the ruins, it attempted to impose order through centralized control. Guards enforced rules strictly, regulating movement and commerce. While this structure provided relative safety for those inside its walls, it also fostered resentment among those excluded. Adytum's authority depended on force rather than consent, reflecting a broader pattern within the boneyard where control often replaced cooperation. Outside fortified enclaves, life remained precarious. Smaller communities occupied apartment blocks, subway stations, and collapsed shopping centers, adapting spaces never intended for long-term habitation. Infrastructure decay forced reliance on scavenged generators and improvised water collection. These settlements rarely grew large. Constrained by limited resources and constant threat, their impermanence became a defining feature, with populations shifting as conditions worsened or opportunities arose elsewhere. The absence of cohesive governance allowed criminal organizations to flourish. Gangs controlled territory through intimidation, extorting travelers and weaker settlements. Violence served as currency, reinforcing the idea that survival depended on strength rather than collaboration. This environment discouraged long-term investment. Few residents believed that building lasting infrastructure was worthwhile when control could change overnight. Trade in the boneyard was sporadic and dangerous. Caravans avoided the area unless necessary, deterred by unpredictable threats and lack of reliable partners. Those who did venture in relied on intermediaries familiar with shifting power dynamics. Markets existed, but they were transient, appearing briefly before dissolving under pressure. This instability limited economic growth, trapping many communities in cycles of scarcity. Cultural identity in the boneyard reflected its fragmentation. Without shared institutions, traditions remained localized. Stories circulated of pre-war Los Angeles, but these memories lacked coherence, filtered through generations who had never seen the city whole. The boneyard became a place where the past was omnipresent yet inaccessible, visible in ruins but disconnected from daily life. Environmental challenges compounded these difficulties. Coastal winds carried radioactive dust inland, contaminating water sources and farmland. Earthquakes, once minor concerns, became serious threats to unstable structures. Settlements that lacked the means to relocate suffered repeated losses, reinforcing the transient nature of habitation. Survival required constant vigilance and adaptation. Attempts at unification emerged periodically, often driven by charismatic leaders or external threats. These efforts rarely lasted. Distrust between communities, combined with resource scarcity, undermined collective action. Each failure reinforced the belief that unity was impossible, entrenching fragmentation as the norm. Despite these challenges, the boneyard persisted. Its scattered settlements demonstrated a form of resilience distinct from centralized communities. When one enclave fell, others remained. Knowledge of scavenging routes, safe zones, and hazards spread informally, creating a shared understanding without formal organization. Survival was distributed, not concentrated. The boneyard's relationship with emerging powers remained uneasy. Larger factions viewed it as unstable and unprofitable, preferring to bypass it rather than invest in reform. This neglect allowed local dynamics to continue unchecked, preserving the boneyard's fractured character. For some residents, this autonomy was preferable to external control, even if it came at great cost. Over time, the boneyard became a symbol of urban collapse, unredeemed by reconstruction. Unlike Shady Sands or Vault City, it offered no clear model for recovery. Instead, It revealed the limits of adaptation in environments where scale and damage overwhelmed communal capacity. Its survival was real, but its progress remained elusive. In the history of post-war settlements, the Boneyard stands as a testament to what happens when civilization shatters beyond easy repair. It shows that not all places can be rebuilt into cohesive societies, and that survival sometimes persists in fragments rather than wholes. The Boneyard endured not through unity or ideology, but through the simple refusal of its inhabitants to vanish, even as the city around them remained forever incomplete. Arroyo began not as a settlement defined by walls or infrastructure, but as a continuation of lineage, founded by the descendants of the Vault 13 dweller who once wandered the wasteland. It emerged from memory rather than planning. Its people did not seek to reclaim the old world or master its remnants. Instead, they chose distance, tradition, and restraint, shaping a community that valued continuity over expansion and survival over influence. The location of Arroyo reflected this philosophy. Positioned away from major trade routes and urban ruins, it avoided many of the dangers that plagued larger settlements. Isolation reduced exposure to raiders, political conflict, and cultural intrusion. In exchange, it limited access to advanced technology and commerce. This trade-off was accepted deliberately. Arroyo's founders believed that safety lay not in strength or wealth, but in obscurity and self-sufficiency. Life in Arroyo centered on subsistence and ritual. Agriculture provided food, supported by hunting and gathering adapted to the local environment. Tools were simple, often handcrafted, and repaired rather than replaced. The absence of complex machinery encouraged skills passed directly from one generation to the next. Knowledge was preserved orally, embedded in stories, ceremonies, and shared labor rather than written record. Governance in Arroyo followed ancestral patterns. Elders guided decisions, drawing authority from experience and communal respect rather than formal law. Disputes were resolved through discussion and ritual rather than punishment. This system reinforced social cohesion, but depended heavily on shared values. Outsiders found it difficult to integrate, as Arroyo's customs resisted change and emphasized collective identity over individual ambition. The tribe's relationship with the past was complex. While aware of the world that existed before the war, Arroyo treated it as distant and cautionary. Pre-war technology was viewed with suspicion, associated with the destruction that had nearly ended humanity. This perspective fostered humility, but also limited adaptation. While other settlements advanced through rediscovered science and trade, Arroyo remained intentionally static. Education reflected this balance. Children learned survival skills early, mastering hunting, farming, and tool-making before abstract knowledge. History was taught as moral lesson rather than chronology, emphasizing the consequences of arrogance and excess. The vault was remembered not as a marvel, but as a reminder of dependence on systems that ultimately failed. This worldview shaped a culture that valued harmony with the land over mastery of it. Arroyo's isolation was tested repeatedly. Environmental challenges, strained resources, and changing climate patterns disrupted traditional practices. Without access to broader trade networks, shortages became existential threats. The settlement's resilience depended on adaptability within its cultural framework, pushing the limits of tradition without abandoning it entirely. Contact with the wider wasteland occurred reluctantly. When interaction became unavoidable, it often revealed the cost of isolation. Arroyo lacked defenses against technologically advanced threats and struggled to respond to forces beyond its experience. These encounters challenged the belief that separation guaranteed safety, forcing the tribe to confront a world that had continued evolving beyond its borders. The greatest test came when Arroyo faced existential collapse. Environmental degradation and external pressures combined to threaten its survival. In response, its leaders made the difficult decision to reach outward, seeking assistance beyond tradition. This moment marked a turning point, exposing both the strength and fragility of a culture built on memory. The events that followed reshaped Arroyo permanently. Through contact and conflict, the tribe gained access to knowledge and resources that challenged its isolationist philosophy. Survival required adaptation, forcing Arroyo to reconsider its relationship with the broader world. Despite these changes, Arroyo retained its core identity. Rituals continued. Elders guided the community. Oral tradition remained central, yet the tribe now carried the understanding that complete separation was no longer viable. Balance replaced isolation as the guiding principle, blending tradition with selective engagement. In the broader landscape of post-war settlements, Arroyo represents a different answer to survival. It rejected expansion, wealth, and power in favor of continuity and restraint. Its success and near failure illustrate the limits of tradition when faced with a changing world. Arroyo endured not because it resisted change entirely, but because it adapted slowly, preserving its essence while acknowledging reality. Arroyo's legacy lies in its reminder that civilization does not always move forward by rebuilding what was lost. Sometimes it survives by choosing what to leave behind. In a wasteland driven by ambition and conflict, Arroyo stood quietly apart, proving that memory and identity could sustain a people, even as the world around them transformed beyond recognition. Megaton formed around an object that should never have allowed life to continue. At the center of the settlement lay an unexploded atomic bomb, half buried in the earth, its metal skin scorched and silent. Where most survivors would have fled from such a remnant of destruction, the people who gathered here chose to remain. Their decision shaped Megaton's identity from its first moments, binding fear, faith, and survival into a single place. The settlement's origins were accidental. Early survivors arrived seeking shelter from radiation storms and hostile wildlife, drawn by the crater's partial protection from wind and sand. Over time, scrap walls rose around the bomb, constructed from aircraft debris and twisted metal scavenged from the surrounding desert. These defenses were crude but effective, enclosing a space that could be defended with limited manpower. As more people arrived, permanence replaced transience. Megaton's defining feature quickly became its bomb. For some, it was simply a dangerous relic, a reminder of the war's unfinished business. The children of Atom emerged from this interpretation, believing the bomb to be a sacred symbol of creation through division. Their faith transformed the threat into a source of purpose, offering meaning in a world stripped of certainty. The bomb became an altar, and Megaton a place of pilgrimage. This coexistence of belief and pragmatism defined Megaton's culture. The bomb was too central, both physically and psychologically, to be ignored. Living beside it required acceptance of risk, whether framed as divine will or calculated necessity. Over time, fear became normalized, absorbed into daily life until it lost its power to disrupt. Governance in Megaton was practical rather than ideological. Leadership focused on maintaining water access, trade, and defense. Decisions were made to preserve stability, not enforce belief. The sheriff's role emphasized mediation over punishment, reflecting the understanding that internal conflict could be as deadly as external threats. Order existed, but it was fragile, sustained by mutual dependence rather than authority. Water was Megaton's lifeline. The purification system scavenged from nearby ruins supported the entire settlement. Its operation required constant maintenance, binding residents together through shared responsibility. Failure would have meant abandonment, reinforcing cooperation even among those divided by belief. In this way, infrastructure served as Megaton's true unifying force. Trade connected Megaton to the wider wasteland. Caravans passed through, exchanging supplies and information. Despite its isolation, Megaton became a recognizable waypoint, known as much for its bomb as for its hospitality. This visibility brought opportunity and danger in equal measure. Travelers brought commerce, but also attention from those who saw the settlement as expendable or symbolic. Megaton's tolerance had limits. Outsiders who threatened the settlement's stability faced swift response. The bomb, while revered by some, remained a point of vulnerability. Any attempt to exploit it was treated as an existential threat. In this shared understanding, belief and survival aligned. Whatever the bomb meant, it could not be allowed to destroy the community. Social life in Megaton reflected adaptation to constant risk. Humor emerged as a coping mechanism, dark and understated. Children grew up playing in the shadow of catastrophe, their normal defined by proximity to danger. This environment fostered resilience, but also desensitization. Megaton residents learned to live with uncertainty as a permanent condition. The presence of the Children of Atom introduced tension with neighboring settlements. Their worship of radiation challenged conventional survival logic, creating suspicion and fear. Yet Megaton's stability contradicted these concerns. The settlement endured, suggesting that belief, however strange, could coexist with functionality. This paradox made Megaton both misunderstood and enduring. Over time, Megaton faced pressures that tested its foundations. External forces saw the bomb as leverage, a tool to control or erase the settlement. These threats revealed the fragility of a community built around an unresolved danger. Survival depended on vigilance, diplomacy, and the willingness to defend not just territory, but identity. Despite these challenges, Megaton persisted. Its residents accepted risk as the cost of continuity. The bomb remained undetonated, its presence a constant reminder of the past's unfinished consequences. Life continued around it, shaped by routines that transformed fear into background noise. In the broader context of wasteland settlements, Megaton represents humanity's capacity to adapt even to the most irrational circumstances. It shows how danger can be reinterpreted as meaning, and how belief can stabilize as much as it divides. Megaton did not thrive because it was safe. It survived because its people chose to live where others could not, turning a symbol of annihilation into the foundation of community. Rivet City rose from the rusting skeleton of a pre-war aircraft carrier, a war machine repurposed into one of the most stable settlements in the capital wasteland. Where the surrounding ruins offered little more than shattered concrete and irradiated dust, the carrier's steel hull provided something rare after the Great War, structure that still held together. Anchored permanently in place, it became both shelter and boundary, defining the settlement as clearly as any wall ever could. The decision to inhabit the carrier was driven by practicality. Its size allowed for separation of living spaces, storage, and industry. Its height lifted residents above many ground-level threats. While the surrounding water acted as a natural barrier, access points were limited and easily monitored, reducing the need for large defensive forces. What had once been designed to project power across oceans now served to preserve life in a fractured world. Life aboard Rivet City developed in layers, both literal and social. The upper decks housed administrative spaces, marketplaces, and communal areas where daily interaction occurred. Below, in darker corridors and repurposed compartments, lived those who performed essential labor, maintaining systems few fully understood but everyone depended upon. This vertical organization created a quiet hierarchy, one reinforced not by ideology, but by proximity to authority and resources. Governance in Rivet City emphasized order and procedure. Councils and elected officials managed disputes, trade agreements, and security policies with careful deliberation. Unlike settlements ruled by force or tradition, Rivet City relied on bureaucratic processes inherited from the old world. This approach brought predictability, but also distance. Decisions were slow, filtered through committees rather than instinct. reflecting a belief that stability came from restraint rather than reaction. Science shaped Rivet City's identity more than belief or heritage. Medical facilities operated with pre-war knowledge, preserved through careful maintenance and education. Doctors and researchers studied radiation effects, disease, and human health, seeking to mitigate the wasteland's long-term damage rather than simply endure it. This emphasis on medicine attracted outsiders seeking treatment, reinforcing Rivet City's reputation as a place of healing and reason. Water purification became central to the settlement's importance. The carrier's systems were adapted to process contaminated river water into a usable supply, supporting not only Rivet City but nearby trade routes. Control of clean water granted influence, but the settlement avoided overt leverage. Instead, it used access to foster cooperation, understanding that trust protected the carrier more effectively than threats ever could. Trade flourished within Rivet City's markets. Merchants offered food, equipment, and information to residents and travelers alike. The settlement's relative safety encouraged commerce, turning it into a hub for exchange in an otherwise hostile region. Yet trade was regulated, reflecting concern that unchecked commerce could invite instability. Balance was maintained carefully, prioritizing sustainability over rapid growth. Social life aboard the carrier reflected both confinement and continuity. Residents lived close together, sharing narrow corridors and recycled air. Privacy was limited, encouraging familiarity but also friction. Over time, customs emerged to manage this proximity. Schedules, designated spaces, and unspoken rules governed daily interaction, preserving harmony within steel walls that could not expand. Children grew up surrounded by reminders of the old world's military might. They learned history not from textbooks alone, but from the very structure that housed them. The carrier's weapons, now inert, served as silent lessons in the consequences of power unchecked by foresight. Education emphasized responsibility, preparing younger generations to maintain systems rather than conquer territory. Rivet City's isolation from the mainland shaped its worldview. While physically close to other settlements, its separation by water created psychological distance. Residents often viewed the wasteland with cautious detachment, aware of its dangers but insulated from its daily chaos. This separation fostered a sense of superiority in some and resentment in others, particularly among those denied permanent residence. Security relied on limited access and vigilance rather than aggression. Guards monitored entry points, enforcing rules designed to prevent infiltration and conflict. This defensive posture discouraged raiders and opportunists, but also limited flexibility. When threats arose that could not be kept at bay through control alone, Rivet City struggled to respond quickly. Relations with other settlements were pragmatic. Alliances were formed when mutually beneficial, avoided when risk outweighed reward. Rivet City preferred diplomacy over domination, yet its reliance on order sometimes clashed with the realities of wasteland politics. Ideal solutions did not always survive contact with desperation. Over time, internal tensions surfaced. Class divisions deepened as access to education, medical care, and influence concentrated among certain groups. While overt conflict remained rare, dissatisfaction simmered quietly. The same systems that preserved stability also constrained change, making reforms slow and contested. Despite these challenges, Rivet City endured. Its continued operation demonstrated that complex systems could survive beyond the old world if carefully maintained. It proved that science and governance still had a place, even in an environment defined by loss. Yet its endurance depended on constant effort, vigilance, and compromise. In the broader history of post-war settlements, Rivet City stands as a testament to adaptation through preservation. It did not reinvent civilization, nor did it reject it. Instead, it carried fragments forward, held together by steel and discipline. In doing so, it showed that survival could be achieved not only through strength or faith, but through patience, procedure, and the willingness to live within limits set long ago. Canterbury Commons occupied a space between survival and performance. Unlike settlements that grew from necessity or ideology, it developed as a place defined by interaction. Located at a crossroads of caravan routes in the capital wasteland, it never became large or heavily fortified. Instead, its value lay in its accessibility. Traders passed through regularly, bringing news, goods, and movement to an otherwise fractured region. Canterbury Commons did not dominate its surroundings. It connected them. In its early years, the settlement functioned as a simple trade stop. A handful of buildings offered shelter, storage, and basic commerce. Merchants paused to resupply, guards rested, and information exchanged hands as casually as caps. Over time, this routine created familiarity. Travelers began to recognize faces, establish informal relationships, and rely on Canterbury Commons as a neutral ground where transactions could occur without immediate threat. Neutrality became its defining trait. The settlement avoided alignment with major factions, understanding that allegiance would compromise its role as an open marketplace. This decision limited protection, but it also preserved trust. Raiders found little incentive to attack a place that offered no concentrated wealth. While caravans valued its predictability, Canterbury Commons survived not by strength, but by remaining unimportant enough to be overlooked and useful enough to be maintained. The most visible feature of Canterbury Commons emerged from conflict turned spectacle. Competing merchant families transformed rivalry into performance, donning costumes and adopting exaggerated personas to dramatize disputes. What began as tension evolved into ritualized conflict, replacing violence with theatrics. This shift preserved the settlement's safety while reinforcing its reputation as a place where disputes ended in laughter rather than bloodshed. This performative culture served a deeper function. It diffused aggression by redirecting it into narrative. By framing conflict as entertainment, Canterbury Commons preserved trade while allowing rivalries to persist without escalation. Visitors became audiences, participants in a shared understanding that survival required compromise. The settlement's identity grew around this balance, blending practicality with humor in a world otherwise stripped of levity. Economically, Canterbury Commons remained modest. It did not produce significant resources, nor did it accumulate wealth. Its markets offered everyday goods rather than rare artifacts. This limitation was intentional. Excess wealth would have invited danger, drawing attention from those who sought control. By maintaining equilibrium, the settlement preserved its autonomy. Social life in Canterbury Commons reflected its transient nature. Few residents remained permanently. Most passed through, contributing briefly to the settlement's rhythm before moving on. This impermanence discouraged rigid hierarchy. Authority rested with those who managed daily operations rather than those who claimed ownership. Decisions were made informally, guided by consensus among regular traders and caretakers. The settlement's openness fostered tolerance. Diverse groups crossed paths, sharing space without deep integration. Conflicts arose, but the absence of permanence reduced stakes. Canterbury Commons became a place where differences could coexist temporarily, a rare condition in a wasteland defined by territorialism. Despite its stability, Canterbury Commons faced constant vulnerability. Lacking defenses, it relied on reputation rather than force. Any significant shift in regional power threatened its existence. The settlement's survival depended on continued relevance as a trade node. When routes changed or dangers increased, its role diminished rapidly. Yet this fragility did not erase its importance. Canterbury Commons demonstrated that not all settlements needed walls or ideology. Some survived by facilitating exchange, offering pause rather than permanence. Its existence reminded travelers that cooperation could occur without domination, and that survival sometimes depended on spaces that belonged to no one fully. In the broader pattern of wasteland settlements, Canterbury Commons represented a connective tissue rather than an anchor. It did not shape history through conquest or governance. It shaped it quietly, through meetings, trades, and shared moments of humanity between journeys. In a world defined by isolation, Canterbury Commons endured by remaining open, proving that even temporary places could leave lasting impressions on those who passed through them. Diamond City rose, where thousands once gathered for celebration rather than survival. Fenway Park, a monument to pre-war leisure, became the foundation for the Commonwealth's most enduring settlement. Its concrete walls, designed to contain crowds and noise, proved equally effective at containing danger. In the aftermath of the Great War, when open ground offered little protection and ruins invited constant threat, the stadium's structure presented an opportunity that survivors could not ignore. The earliest settlers arrived cautiously, drawn by the park's defensible shape and elevated stands. They scavenged seating, fencing, and scrap to reinforce entrances, transforming access tunnels into choke points. What began as temporary shelter evolved into permanence as families claimed sections of the stands, building homes from salvaged materials. Over time, the interior field became the heart of the settlement, a space once reserved for sport, now dedicated to trade and governance. Life in Diamond City developed around visibility. Unlike hidden bunkers or isolated farms, the settlement existed openly, its presence known throughout the Commonwealth. This visibility invited trade, migration, and conflict in equal measure. To survive, Diamond City required rules that balanced openness with security. Governance emerged through councils and elected leadership, emphasizing stability and representation rather than force. Law was enforced not by fear, but by shared interest in preserving the city's fragile order. The market defined Diamond City's daily rhythm. Merchants sold food, weapons, medicine, and relics of the old world, transforming the former baseball diamond into an economic engine. Trade routes converged here, making the city a hub for caravans moving between settlements. This commerce-funded infrastructure attracted skilled labor and reinforced Diamond City's role as a center of exchange rather than conquest. Media played a unique role in shaping identity. Radio broadcasts carried news, music, and commentary beyond the stadium walls, linking isolated homesteads to a shared narrative. Newspapers documented corruption, hardship, and achievement, holding leadership accountable while preserving collective memory. These institutions fostered civic engagement, encouraging residents to see themselves not just as survivors, but as citizens. Security remained a constant concern. Guards patrolled entry points, trained to respond to threats without provoking unnecessary violence. While the city could not match the firepower of major factions, its organization deterred casual aggression. Attacks were rare, not because Diamond City was invulnerable, but because it was costly to disrupt. Too many depended on its markets and services to risk its collapse. Social stratification emerged gradually. Residents living in the upper stands enjoyed greater comfort and influence. Their homes elevated both physically and politically. Those closer to the field formed the city's working core, maintaining shops, clinics, and defenses. This division was subtle but persistent, reflecting the uneven distribution of opportunity that accompanied growth. Efforts to address inequality met resistance. Constrained by limited space and resources, medical care distinguished Diamond City from surrounding settlements. Clinics offered treatment for radiation sickness, injury, and disease, drawing patients from across the Commonwealth. Access was imperfect and resources scarce, but the presence of organized healthcare reinforced the city's reputation as a place where life could be preserved rather than merely prolonged. Education followed similar patterns. Children learned basic literacy, trade skills, and civic responsibility, preparing them to sustain the city's systems. Knowledge was practical, focused on survival within an organized society rather than exploration beyond it. This emphasis ensured continuity, but also limited innovation. anchoring Diamond City to incremental progress. Diamond City's relationship with the Institute cast a long shadow. Fear of infiltration fostered suspicion, testing the city's commitment to openness. Policies hardened, trust eroded, and paranoia threatened to undermine cohesion. Yet even under strain, Diamond City resisted authoritarian measures, recognizing that fear could destroy the very community it sought to protect. Over time, Diamond City became a symbol. To some, it represented hope, proof that civilization could be rebuilt without vaults or secrecy. To others, it embodied compromise, a place where ideals bent beneath pragmatism. Its endurance depended not on perfection, but on adaptability, the willingness to negotiate between safety and freedom. In the broader history of the Commonwealth, Diamond City stands as a testament to resilience shaped by cooperation. It did not escape the wasteland's dangers, nor did it conquer them. Instead, it learned to live alongside them, building routines, institutions, and identities within walls meant for a different purpose. From the echoes of cheering crowds emerged a city defined not by victory, but by persistence, carrying humanity forward one ordinary day at a time. Good Neighbor did not attempt to hide what it was. Built from the shattered remains of pre-war streets and clubs, it emerged as a settlement that rejected order imposed from above. Where Diamond City sought structure and predictability, Good Neighbor embraced volatility as a form of honesty. Its founders did not believe that the wasteland could be civilized through rules alone. They believed survival required freedom, even when that freedom carried risk. The settlement formed organically, attracting those pushed out of more rigid communities. Ghouls, chem dealers, mercenaries, drifters, and idealists found space within its boundaries. Inclusion was not based on trust or purity, but on tolerance. As long as individuals respected an unspoken boundary against disrupting the settlement's internal balance, they were allowed to remain. This loose social contract replaced formal law, creating a fragile but functional equilibrium. Power in Good Neighbor rested less on governance than deterrence. Hancock, its de facto leader, did not rule through bureaucracy or ideology. His authority derived from reputation and presence, a reminder that freedom without consequence would collapse into chaos. Violence was not eliminated, but it was controlled. Acts that threatened the settlement's stability were met with swift response, reinforcing the idea that liberty required boundaries. Economically, Good Neighbor thrived on services avoided elsewhere. Chemtrade, mercenary work, and black market exchanges formed the backbone of its economy. These activities drew clientele from across the Commonwealth, generating income that sustained businesses and residents alike. Unlike settlements that relied on agriculture or formal trade networks, Good Neighbor depended on demand created by desperation and desire. Cultural life in Good Neighbor reflected its origins. Music, performance, and nightlife persisted even as the world lay in ruins. These expressions served as defiance, affirming identity in a landscape defined by loss. For residents, indulgence was not denial, but resilience, a way to assert humanity amid decay. The settlement's atmosphere rejected solemnity, favoring noise and motion over silence. Ghouls played a prominent role in Good Neighbor's identity. Accepted without precondition, they found safety rarely offered elsewhere. This inclusion shaped the settlement's values, normalizing difference and challenging prejudices common in the wasteland. Yet tolerance was practical rather than idealistic. Ghouls were accepted because they belonged, not because Good Neighbor sought moral superiority. Security remained informal. Armed individuals protected their own interests, creating overlapping deterrence rather than centralized defense. This approach allowed flexibility but limited scalability. When threats exceeded individual capacity, the settlement relied on collective response, coordinated through shared interest rather than command. This system functioned as long as trust remained intact. Relations with neighboring settlements were strained but necessary. Diamond City viewed Good Neighbor with suspicion, while Good Neighbor regarded Diamond City as constrained by fear. Trade occurred despite ideological differences, driven by mutual need. These exchanges underscored the interconnectedness of survival, even among communities that rejected one another's values. Good Neighbor's openness also invited danger. Criminals tested boundaries, seeking to exploit perceived lawlessness. Each challenge forced the settlement to reaffirm its limits, balancing freedom against survival. Too much control risked eroding identity. Too little invited destruction. This constant negotiation defined life in Good Neighbor more than any external threat. Over time, the settlement's reputation solidified. It became known as a place where one could live without judgment, provided one accepted responsibility for one's actions. This reputation attracted those unwilling or unable to conform elsewhere, reinforcing Good Neighbor's role as an outlet for the Commonwealth's successes. Yet beneath its defiance lay vulnerability. Without formal institutions, continuity depended on personalities rather than systems. Leadership transitions carried risk. Economic stability fluctuated with demand. Environmental hazards remained unchecked. Good Neighbor endured through momentum rather than planning, surviving as long as its people chose to remain invested. In the broader context of wasteland settlements, Good Neighbor represents a counterpoint to structured rebuilding. It demonstrates that survival can coexist with disorder, and that freedom, though dangerous, can sustain community when imposed order fails. Good Neighbor did not promise safety or progress. It offered honesty, allowing residents to face the wasteland on their own terms, and proving that even in ruin, choice remained possible. Not all settlements in the Commonwealth could be seen, mapped, or approached openly. Some existed only as patterns, their influence felt without ever being acknowledged. These were the settlements shaped, guided, or quietly altered by the Institute, a hidden power whose presence reached far beyond its underground walls. While the Institute did not found towns in the traditional sense, its actions created communities that functioned as extensions of its will, shaped by unseen intervention rather than organic growth. The Institute's relationship with surface settlements was indirect by design. Rather than occupying territory, it embedded itself within existing populations through infiltration, observation, and selective manipulation. Synth replacements allowed the Institute to influence leadership, redirect resources, and gather intelligence without revealing its hand. Settlements affected by these methods often experience subtle shifts rather than sudden change. Policies hardened, trade patterns altered, internal tensions increased without clear cause. Some communities benefited unknowingly from Institute involvement. Strategic removal of threats, stabilization of key infrastructure, or introduction of advanced technology through intermediaries improved survival prospects. In these cases, settlements interpreted their success as fortune or resilience, unaware that external calculations shaped their outcomes. The Institute viewed such influence as stewardship, guiding the wasteland toward what it considered a more efficient future. Other settlements suffered. Kidnappings, experiments, and resource extraction destabilized communities, leaving scars that manifested as paranoia and distrust. The fear of replacement undermined social cohesion, making collaboration difficult. Even settlements untouched directly by the Institute felt its presence through rumor, shaping behavior and governance through fear rather than fact. In this way, the Institute became part of the psychological landscape, influencing settlement development without ever being seen. Safe houses and relay points functioned as the closest approximation of Institute-controlled settlements. These locations, scattered throughout the Commonwealth, served as staging grounds for operations. Maintained by synths or coerced humans, they blended into surrounding ruins, appearing abandoned or unremarkable. Their existence demonstrated the Institute's preference for invisibility, prioritizing access over permanence. The Institute's technological superiority allowed it to bypass traditional settlement constraints. Teleportation removed reliance on roads, walls, or supply lines. As a result, its influence ignored geography, reaching isolated farms and dense urban centers alike. Settlements could not predict where intervention might occur, reinforcing a sense of vulnerability that reshaped defensive planning across the region. Ethically, the Institute's approach reframed settlement life as experimental data. Communities became variables in long-term studies, their successes and failures measured against theoretical models rather than lived experience. Decisions that affected thousands were made without consultation, justified by projected outcomes rather than immediate suffering. This perspective reduced settlements to systems, stripping them of agency in shaping their own futures. Resistance emerged quietly. Some settlements developed countermeasures, screening newcomers or limiting access to sensitive roles. Others allied with groups dedicated to opposing the Institute, transforming homes into nodes of defiance. These actions reshaped settlement culture, fostering secrecy and suspicion. Trust became conditional, reshaping how communities interacted internally and externally. The Institute's decline altered this dynamic but did not erase its impact. Settlements once guided or disrupted by its influence were forced to adapt to sudden absence. Leaders replaced synth infiltrators. Systems reliant on hidden intervention failed or required reconstruction. Communities confronted the realization that their history had been shaped by an unseen hand, complicating identity and memory. In the long view, Institute-influenced settlements occupy a unique place in wasteland history. They represent a form of civilization shaped not by shared effort or belief, but by external design. Their stories challenge the notion that settlements always reflect the values of their inhabitants. Instead, they reveal how power, when invisible, can redefine survival without ever claiming ownership. These communities endured not because they were stronger or wiser, but because they were useful. Their legacy is one of ambiguity, leaving behind towns that survived through manipulation rather than choice. In a world struggling to rebuild authenticity, Institute-shaped settlements stand as reminders that control does not always require presence, and that the most profound influence is often the one that remains unseen. Far Harbor formed at the edge of habitability, where land met sea and the air itself carried quiet menace. Situated on the rocky shores of Mount Desert Island, the settlement emerged not from abundance or ambition, but from necessity. The fog that rolled in from the ocean was thick with radioactive particles, mutating wildlife and eroding sanity as much as flesh. Where other settlements fled such conditions, the people of Far Harbor stayed, learning to endure an environment that never fully accepted them. The earliest settlers arrived by chance and desperation. Fishing boats and small vessels brought survivors seeking refuge from mainland threats, only to find an island shaped by relentless storms and creeping radiation. The fog advanced and retreated unpredictably, swallowing forests and coastlines alike. Survival required constant vigilance, and from this pressure emerged a culture defined by discipline and shared labor rather than comfort. Far Harbor's physical structure reflected its priorities. The settlement was enclosed by heavy fog condensers, machines designed to push back the encroaching mist. These devices became both shield and symbol, marking the boundary between life and dissolution. Their maintenance demanded cooperation, binding residents together through necessity. Every individual understood that failure meant extinction, reinforcing collective responsibility. Life in Far Harbor revolved around the sea. Fishing provided sustenance, trade, and identity. The dangers of the fog extended beneath the waves, mutating marine life into unpredictable threats, yet also creating new resources. Far Harbor's fishermen adapted, developing techniques and equipment suited to hostile waters. Each voyage carried risk, but also reaffirmed the settlement's resilience. Governance in Far Harbor was pragmatic and understated. Leaders emerged through trust earned in crisis rather than election or inheritance. Decisions prioritized survival over ideology, often weighing moral considerations against immediate necessity. This approach fostered unity, but left little room for dissent. In an environment where hesitation could be fatal, consensus was often assumed rather than debated. The fog shaped more than daily routines. It influenced belief. Many residents developed a fatalistic worldview, accepting loss as inevitable and life as provisional. This outlook tempered ambition, discouraging expansion or long-term planning beyond immediate survival. Far Harbor did not dream of growth. It focused on persistence, measuring success in seasons endured rather than futures envisioned. Relations with neighboring groups reflected this tension. Far Harbor existed alongside the children of Atom and the island's native wildlife, both altered by radiation in ways that challenged conventional understanding. Interactions oscillated between uneasy coexistence and open hostility. Each group interpreted the fog differently, shaping conflict as much as cooperation. Far Harbor's survival depended on navigating these relationships without provoking escalation. Trade with the mainland remained limited but essential. Supplies difficult to produce locally were brought in at great risk. In exchange, Far Harbor offered seafood and access to navigational knowledge unique to the island. These exchanges reinforced the settlement's isolation while preventing complete dependence, maintaining a delicate balance between self-sufficiency and connection. Culturally, Far Harbor valued endurance above all else. Stories centered on storms survived, voyages completed, and loved ones lost to the fog. Memory served as instruction, reminding each generation of the cost of complacency. Children grew up learning to read the weather, maintain machinery, and respect forces beyond control. Education was experiential, shaped by environment rather than doctrine. The settlement's greatest challenge lay in its reliance on fragile technology. Fog condensers required constant upkeep, and failures had immediate consequences. Unlike walls or weapons, these machines could not be replaced easily. Each breakdown tested the community's cohesion, forcing difficult choices about resource allocation and risk. Despite these vulnerabilities, Far Harbor endured where others would have vanished. Its survival stemmed from adaptation rather than resistance. Residents accepted that the island could not be tamed, only negotiated with. This acceptance shaped a culture that valued humility and caution, traits often dismissed elsewhere as weakness. In the broader landscape of post-war settlements, Far Harbor stands apart. It demonstrates survival not through conquest or isolation, but through coexistence with hostile conditions. Its people did not conquer the fog, they lived alongside it, acknowledging its power while refusing to surrender entirely. Far Harbor's legacy lies in its lesson that not all environments can be reclaimed, and not all victories are permanent. Sometimes survival means enduring without triumph, holding ground without hope of expansion. On the edge of the world, Far Harbor persisted, proving that even in places where nature itself resists humanity, life can continue through patience, vigilance, and shared resolve. The nucleus existed where most settlements would never choose to remain. Built within the irradiated heart of a nuclear submarine base, it was a place saturated with radiation long after the war's fires had cooled elsewhere. For the children of Atom, this environment was not a threat to be avoided, but a sacred presence to be embraced. The settlement emerged not through necessity alone, but through belief, transforming contamination into communion. The origins of the nucleus were deliberate. Followers of Atom sought locations where radiation remained strong and undiluted, believing that such places allowed closer connection to the divine force they revered. When they discovered the submarine base, its reactors and sealed chambers offered both shelter and sanctity. The thick concrete walls contained radiation while preserving it, creating a controlled environment where faith could be practiced without interruption. Life within the nucleus followed ritual rhythms rather than practical schedules. Exposure to radiation was not minimized, but regulated according to doctrine. Protective gear was worn selectively, reflecting spiritual hierarchy rather than safety standards. The faithful believed that atoms' glow refined the body and spirit, granting clarity and purpose. Those who succumbed to sickness were not mourned as victims, but honored as having been fully embraced by the divine. Governance in the nucleus was inseparable from belief. Authority flowed from religious standing rather than competence or experience. Leaders interpreted atoms' will, guiding communal decisions through doctrine rather than debate. Dissent was rare, not because it was suppressed, but because the community was self-selecting. Only those who accepted the faith could endure life within the settlement, creating ideological unity that replaced law. Material needs were secondary. Food and water were obtained through limited trade and scavenging, but consumption was framed as necessity rather than priority. The children of Atom valued spiritual fulfillment over comfort, viewing hardship as proof of devotion. This outlook reduced internal conflict, but also limited adaptability. Practical concerns were often subordinated to ritual observance. Relations with neighboring settlements were tense and cautious. The nucleus inspired fear among those who viewed radiation as poison rather than blessing. Trade occurred rarely and under strict conditions. Outsiders were tolerated only when necessary, their presence controlled to prevent disruption. This isolation reinforced the community's identity, framing the outside world as spiritually blind. The presence of the nucleus altered the balance on the island. Its inhabitants navigated the fog with ease, unburdened by fear of contamination. This capability granted strategic advantage, allowing movement through areas others avoided. Yet the children of Atom did not seek domination. Their focus remained inward, centered on faith rather than expansion. Culturally, the nucleus preserved continuity through scripture and ceremony. Stories of the Great War were interpreted as sacred events, proof of Atom's power and humanity's rebirth through division. These narratives provided meaning in a world where history often felt arbitrary. For believers, the wasteland was not a mistake, but fulfillment. The settlement's greatest strength was also its greatest vulnerability. Absolute belief reduced fear, but it also discouraged questioning. When circumstances changed or threats emerged beyond doctrine, the community struggled to respond pragmatically. Faith provided comfort, but it could not repair failing systems or negotiate complex alliances. Despite this, the nucleus endured. Its members accepted mortality as sacred outcome rather than failure. In doing so, they found stability and conviction, a rare quality in a world defined by uncertainty. The settlement persisted not because it adapted to the wasteland, but because it redefined what adaptation meant. In the broader tapestry of post-war settlements, the nucleus stands as an example of survival through belief alone. It shows that communities can be sustained not only by resources or security, but by shared meaning powerful enough to override fear. While others rebuilt civilization from fragments of the past, the children of Atom built theirs around acceptance of destruction, finding peace in the glow that ended the old world and reshaped the new. Covenant presented itself as a sanctuary. From the outside, it appeared orderly and welcoming. Its gates closed not in hostility, but in promise of safety. Clean streets, intact homes, and polite greetings stood in sharp contrast to the chaos beyond its walls. In a commonwealth defined by fear and suspicion, Covenant offered certainty, yet this certainty was built on a foundation far more fragile and extreme than it first appeared. The settlement's origins were rooted in trauma, founded by survivors determined to prevent infiltration by synthetic humans. Covenant emerged from a belief that survival depended on absolute vigilance. Unlike other communities that adapted to fear, Covenant sought to eliminate it through control. Its residents accepted the idea that safety required sacrifice, and that trust could no longer be assumed without verification. Entry into Covenant was conditional. Visitors were subjected to tests designed to determine humanity. Their responses analyzed for signs of artificial origin. These evaluations were framed as necessary precautions rather than violations, reflecting a worldview where individual rights were subordinate to collective security. For residents, this process reinforced belonging. Passing the test affirmed identity, granting inclusion in a community defined by exclusion. Life within Covenant was structured and quiet. Residents adhered to routines that emphasized predictability and order. Homes were maintained meticulously. Public spaces remained calm. This stability reassured those who had witnessed the collapse of other settlements, offering an environment where chaos felt held at bay. Yet beneath this surface, tension persisted, sustained by constant observation. Governance in Covenant was centralized and opaque. Decisions were made by a small group whose authority derived from their perceived ability to protect the community. Transparency was limited, justified by the need to prevent infiltration. This secrecy insulated leadership from challenge, allowing extreme measures to proceed unchecked. The settlement's true purpose extended beyond its walls. Covenant functioned as a testing ground, gathering data through interrogations and experiments conducted on suspected synths. These activities occurred out of sight, their consequences hidden from most residents. The community's safety was thus purchased through actions its members rarely witnessed but implicitly endorsed through silence. This arrangement created moral distance. By separating daily life from the mechanisms of control, Covenant allowed residents to preserve a sense of innocence. Atrocities were abstract, reduced to necessity rather than choice. This compartmentalization sustained stability while eroding empathy, narrowing the community's moral horizon. Relations with neighboring settlements were limited and cautious. Covenant avoided deep integration, preferring isolation that reduced perceived risk. Trade occurred sparingly, and alliances were rare. This insularity reinforced paranoia, creating a feedback loop where lack of trust justified further withdrawal. Despite its precautions, Covenant remained vulnerable. Its reliance on extreme measures fostered internal fragility. Dissent, though rare, carried high stakes. Those who questioned methods risked suspicion themselves, discouraging reflection or reform. Over time, this atmosphere constrained adaptation, locking the settlement into a rigid posture ill-suited to changing conditions. Covenant's security was also predicated on a flawed assumption that threats could be fully identified and controlled. The complexity of synthetic infiltration defied simple testing, rendering absolute certainty impossible. As doubts accumulated, the settlement's foundation began to crack, revealing the limits of control as a substitute for trust. In the broader context of wasteland settlements, Covenant stands as a warning. It demonstrates how fear, when left unchecked, can reshape communities into instruments of their own insecurity. By prioritizing safety above all else, Covenant sacrificed the flexibility and compassion necessary for long-term survival. Though it endured for a time, Covenant's legacy is one of caution rather than achievement. It shows that walls built from suspicion are difficult to maintain, and that communities defined by what they exclude risk losing what they aim to protect. In a world struggling to rebuild humanity, Covenant's story reminds the wasteland that survival achieved through extremism carries its own quiet cost. Some settlements were never meant to be permanent. They existed in motion, defined not by walls or markets, but by absence and concealment. These were the railroad safehouses and hidden communities, scattered across the Commonwealth as quiet points of refuge. Unlike visible towns that asserted their presence, these locations survived by remaining unnoticed, their success measured by how little attention they attracted. The railroad emerged from a singular purpose rather than geography. Its members believed that synthetic beings deserved freedom, and this belief shaped every space they occupied. Safe houses were established in abandoned buildings, forgotten tunnels, and overlooked ruins, places where decay provided cover. These locations blended seamlessly into the wasteland, appearing lifeless to outsiders while sheltering those in transit. Life within a safe house was temporary by design. Residents understood that permanence invited discovery. Supplies were limited, movement encouraged, and identities kept fluid. Names changed, stories were rewritten. This constant state of transition prevented the formation of traditional community bonds, replacing them with trust rooted in shared risk rather than shared history. Governance in these hidden settlements was minimal. Decisions were made quickly, guided by necessity rather than deliberation. Authority belonged to those coordinating escapes and managing resources. But leadership remained situational. Once a task was complete, roles dissolved, preventing hierarchy from solidifying. This structure preserved flexibility, essential for survival under constant threat. Security relied on obscurity rather than force. Safe houses avoided defenses that might signal importance. Instead, they relied on secrecy, false trails, and misinformation. When compromised, they were abandoned without hesitation. The loss of a location was accepted as part of the cost of operation, reinforcing the idea that places mattered less than people. Culturally, railroad safe houses fostered a unique form of solidarity. Humans and synths lived side by side, united by shared vulnerability. Prejudice was secondary to survival. Bonds formed quickly, often intensely, then dissolved as individuals moved on. This transience created a culture that valued action over reflection, urgency over tradition. The emotional toll of this lifestyle was significant. Constant movement eroded stability, leaving little space for grief or celebration. Safe houses became places of quiet tension, where relief at survival coexisted with anxiety about discovery. Yet for those who passed through, these spaces represented hope in a world that often denied it. Interactions with the broader Commonwealth were indirect. Safe houses avoided trade and visibility, limiting contact to trusted intermediaries. This isolation reduced risk but increased dependence on external networks. Failure of communication could doom an entire route, underscoring the fragility of survival built on secrecy. Despite their impermanence, railroad safe houses influenced settlement culture beyond their walls. Stories of escape and resistance circulated, inspiring both fear and admiration. The idea that freedom could be pursued even under constant surveillance challenged assumptions about power and control, reshaping how communities viewed the Institute's reach. The decline or transformation of the railroad altered these hidden settlements. As pressure eased or objectives changed, some safe houses were abandoned permanently. Others transitioned into different forms of refuge, their original purpose fading into rumor. The transient nature of these communities ensured that little physical trace remained, preserving anonymity even in memory. In the history of post-war settlements, railroad safe houses represent survival without territory. They show that communities can exist without permanence, sustained by shared purpose rather than place. Their legacy lies not in structures left behind, but in lives moved forward, carried quietly from one forgotten room to the next, proving that even in the most controlled world, escape remained possible. Raider settlements emerged where cooperation failed and restraint collapsed. They were not accidents of circumstance, but deliberate choices made in the aftermath of loss. When law vanished and resources grew scarce, some survivors abandoned the effort to rebuild and instead turned outward, taking what they needed through force. Raider camps became communities organized around violence, their structures reflecting a worldview where survival belonged to those willing to inflict suffering without hesitation. These settlements formed quickly and shifted often. Locations were chosen for advantage rather than comfort, occupying highway overpasses, factories, tunnels, and fortified ruins. Natural choke points allowed small groups to control movement, extracting tribute from travelers and nearby communities. Raider camps rarely invested in permanence. Buildings were reinforced crudely, traps scattered without concern for longevity. If a location became untenable, the group moved on, leaving destruction behind. Social structure within raider settlements was rigid and brutal. Authority belonged to the strongest or most feared individual, often maintained through public displays of dominance. Loyalty was enforced through intimidation rather than trust. Betrayal was common, but expected. In this environment, violence became language, used to resolve disputes and establish hierarchy. Stability existed only as long as fear outweighed ambition. Despite their reputation, raider settlements were not entirely chaotic. They followed internal logic shaped by necessity. Roles emerged based on utility. Scouts, enforcers, and scavengers each contributed to survival, albeit through exploitation rather than production. Resources were pooled and distributed according to rank, reinforcing hierarchy. This organization allowed raider groups to endure longer than isolated criminals, transforming predation into a sustainable, if destructive, system. Economically, raiders relied on extraction rather than creation. Settlements nearby became targets, forced to provide food, caps, or labor in exchange for temporary safety. This arrangement hollowed surrounding regions, weakening communities that might otherwise have grown into stable settlements. Raider dominance created zones of stagnation, where progress stalled under constant threat. Culturally, raider settlements embraced excess. Violence was ritualized, reinforced through symbols, trophies, and stories. Masks, armor adorned with human remains, and graffiti transformed fear into identity. These expressions served to desensitize members, eroding empathy while reinforcing group cohesion. In a world stripped of meaning, raiders created purpose through domination. Substance abuse played a significant role in raider life. Chems dulled fear, enhanced aggression, and provided escape from psychological trauma. Dependence reinforced control, binding individuals to the group through addiction. This cycle sustained violence but undermined long-term stability, as erratic behavior increased internal conflict. Interactions with other factions were opportunistic. Raiders avoided direct confrontation with organized powers, preferring vulnerable targets. When forced into conflict, they relied on numbers and unpredictability rather than strategy. Their settlements rarely survived sustained opposition, collapsing quickly when challenged by disciplined forces. Despite this fragility, raider settlements persisted across generations. Children raised in these environments learned violence as normality, perpetuating cycles of exploitation. The absence of alternatives reinforced fatalism, making raider life appear inevitable rather than chosen. Escape required opportunity rarely afforded. In the broader wasteland, raider settlements functioned as pressure points. They tested the strength of emerging communities, shaping defense strategies and alliances. Their existence forced other settlements to invest in security, diverting resources from growth and reinforcing isolation. In this way, raiders influenced settlement development even beyond their territory. Raider settlements represent humanity stripped of pretense. They show how quickly society can invert when fear replaces trust and survival eclipses morality. While many communities sought to rebuild fragments of the old world, raiders rejected its values entirely, embracing a present defined by power and immediacy. Yet even in their brutality, raider settlements revealed something deeply human. They were responses to trauma, expressions of loss transformed into aggression. Their camps stood as reminders that survival alone does not restore civilization, and that without shared purpose beyond domination, endurance becomes destruction repeated endlessly. Caesar's legion settlements emerged not as communities in the traditional sense, but as instruments of control, where other settlements formed through shared survival or mutual benefits. Legion settlements existed to serve an idea. Built along conquered territory in the former Southwest, these locations were defined by order imposed through fear, discipline, and absolute obedience. They were not meant to nurture life, but to sustain expansion. The Legion's settlements often began as captured towns. Once conquered, their identities were erased deliberately. Names were changed or abandoned, local customs were suppressed. Leadership structures were dismantled and replaced with Legion authority. Settlements became extensions of the Legion's military hierarchy, stripped of autonomy and reshaped to support conquest. Daily life in Legion-controlled settlements was rigid and austere. Civilians existed under constant supervision, their roles narrowly defined. Agriculture, manufacturing, and logistics were organized to supply the Legion's armies. Productivity was enforced through punishment rather than incentive. Fear replaced trust as the primary motivator, creating compliance without loyalty. Slavery formed the foundation of Legion settlement economics. Captured populations were reduced to labor forces, their humanity denied to ensure obedience. This system provided efficiency in the short term, allowing rapid mobilization of resources. In the long term, it hollowed communities, removing initiative and eroding resilience. Settlements survived only as long as Legion presence remained strong. Culturally, Legion settlements were stripped of memory. History was rewritten to center Caesar's narrative, portraying the Legion as inevitable and eternal. Education served indoctrination, teaching obedience rather than skill. Children raised within these settlements learned discipline before identity, their lives shaped by expectation of service rather than choice. Security was absolute. Patrols monitored movement, and punishment for dissent was public and severe. This visibility reinforced control, discouraging resistance through example. Yet beneath this order lay fragility. The absence of trust and cooperation meant that settlements could not self-regulate. Without Legion oversight, they collapsed quickly, revealing dependence rather than strength. Relations with neighboring settlements were hostile by design. The Legion rejected diplomacy, viewing compromise as weakness. Settlements on the frontier existed under constant threat, either as future conquests or buffer zones. This aggressive posture limited trade and isolated Legion territories economically, relying instead on plunder and forced labor. Infrastructure development was minimal. While roads and fortifications were maintained for military movement, civilian facilities received little investment. Settlements remained utilitarian, their design reflecting temporary occupation rather than permanence. Comfort was viewed as corruption, reinforcing a culture that equated suffering with strength. Despite its brutality, the Legion achieved stability within its controlled regions. Violence decreased once conquest was complete, replaced by predictable order. For some, this predictability was preferable to chaos. Settlements experienced fewer raids and internal conflicts, but at the cost of freedom and humanity. Survival was guaranteed only through submission. The ideological foundation of Legion settlements drew heavily from distorted interpretations of ancient empires. Caesar believed that civilization required eradication of weakness, using extreme measures to forge unity. Settlements became laboratories for this belief, their populations reduced to components of a larger war machine. This approach carried inherent limitations. Innovation stagnated under rigid hierarchy. Adaptation slowed as initiative was punished. Settlements became brittle, capable of functioning only within narrow parameters defined by command. When circumstances shifted beyond doctrine, failure followed quickly. In the broader landscape of wasteland settlements, Caesar's Legion represents survival through domination rather than cooperation. Its settlements demonstrate how order can be imposed rapidly, but sustained only through constant force. They stand as cautionary examples of rebuilding civilization without compassion, showing that control alone cannot replace the bonds that allow communities to endure. Legion settlements did not seek to create homes. They created obedience. In doing so, They revealed the cost of stability achieved through fear, a stability that endures only while the hand enforcing it remains unchallenged. The New Vegas Strip survived because it was never meant to belong to the wasteland. Preserved through calculation rather than chance, it emerged from the Great War largely intact, shielded by foresight and technology that spared it the fate of surrounding regions. While the Mojave burned, the Strip endured as a fragment of the old world, its lights flickering back to life long before civilization returned elsewhere. Its survival was orchestrated by Robert Edwin House, whose preparations transformed Las Vegas from a city of excess into a controlled enclave. Missile defense systems intercepted incoming warheads, sacrificing the outskirts to preserve the core. This decision shaped everything that followed. The Strip became an island of preservation, surrounded by ruin, defined by deliberate exclusion rather than organic recovery. Life on the Strip was structured around containment. Access was restricted, regulated by gates, credit checks, and armed securitrons. These barriers separated order from chaos, creating a controlled environment where pre-war aesthetics and routines could be replicated. Casinos reopened not as relics, but as functioning institutions, their purpose shifting from entertainment to economic stabilization. Governance on the Strip was centralized absolutely. Mr. House ruled not through charisma or belief, but through omnipresent surveillance and mechanical enforcement. Decisions were calculated, optimized to preserve stability and profit. Human error was minimized by automation, reducing unpredictability at the cost of autonomy. The Strip functioned as a system, not a society. The families that operated the casinos were granted authority conditionally, their power derived from House's tolerance, their survival dependent on obedience. Each family controlled its domain, maintaining order and generating revenue, but none possessed true sovereignty. This arrangement created the illusion of diversity while preserving centralized control. Economically, the Strip thrived on concentration. Wealth flowed inward, drawn from travelers, traders, and factions seeking influence. Caps accumulated rapidly, funding maintenance, security, and expansion. Unlike settlements that relied on agriculture or trade routes, the Strip generated value internally, recycling consumption into stability. Culturally, the Strip preserved pre-war excess in a post-war context. Music, performance, and luxury offered escape from the Mojave's brutality. For visitors, it represented a return to normalcy, however artificial. This illusion served a purpose, reinforcing loyalty and compliance by reminding people of what civilization once felt like. Security was absolute. Securitrons patrolled relentlessly, their presence constant and impersonal. Violence was suppressed swiftly, ensuring predictability. This deterrence discouraged rebellion, but also eliminated spontaneity. The Strip remained safe because it allowed no deviation from design. Relations with surrounding settlements were transactional. Freeside provided labor and filtration, absorbing the Strip's overflow while remaining excluded from its protections. Other factions negotiated carefully, recognizing that the Strip's stability rested on neutrality backed by force. The Strip did not expand, it endured. The Strip's greatest strength was also its weakness. Its reliance on a single authority made it vulnerable to disruption. Without House's oversight, the system risked collapse, its delicate balance dependent on continued control. Adaptation was limited by design, constrained by the very order that preserved it. In the broader history of wasteland settlements, the New Vegas Strip stands as an anomaly. It did not rebuild civilization. It preserved a fragment of it intact. Its survival challenges assumptions about progress, showing that endurance can be achieved through preservation rather than adaptation. Yet its existence raises quiet questions about the cost of stability when humanity becomes secondary to design, and life is reduced to function within a perfectly maintained machine. Freeside existed in the shadow of preservation, just beyond the controlled gates of the New Vegas Strip. It formed as a settlement defined by exclusion rather than design. Where the Strip represented stability through control, Freeside reflected the consequences of that control imposed unevenly. It became a place where people gathered not because it was safe or prosperous, but because there was nowhere else to go. The settlement emerged organically as travelers, laborers, and refugees clustered near the Strip's entrance. Access to the casinos promised opportunity, but admission was restricted. Those without caps or credentials were turned away, left to survive in the surrounding streets. Over time, temporary camps hardened into permanent habitation. Ruined buildings became homes. Alleyways became marketplaces. Freeside took shape as a buffer between order and chaos. Life in Freeside was defined by scarcity. Food, clean water, and medical care were limited, often controlled by informal groups rather than institutions. Aid arrived sporadically, dependent on charity or external intervention. This unpredictability shaped daily behavior, encouraging caution and adaptability. Survival required constant negotiation, both with the environment and with others competing for the same limited resources. Governance in Freeside was fragmented. No single authority controlled the settlement entirely. Instead, influence shifted among local groups, protectors, and opportunists. The Kings, a gang inspired by pre-war cultural memory, provided a form of order through identity rather than law. Their presence discouraged random violence while fostering loyalty based on shared belonging rather than fear. Economically, Freeside existed as an extension of the Strip without sharing its benefits. Labor flowed inward, supporting casinos and infrastructure, while wealth rarely flowed back. This imbalance entrenched poverty, creating a cycle where residents depended on opportunities that rarely materialized. The Strip's prosperity became both lure and barrier, visible yet unreachable. Culturally, Freeside developed resilience through adaptation. Music, ritual, and community gatherings offered relief from hardship, reinforcing identity amid instability. These expressions did not erase suffering, but they provided continuity, allowing residents to claim ownership over lives constrained by external forces. Violence remained a constant threat. Without formal security, disputes escalated quickly, yet most residents understood the cost of chaos. Informal agreements and mutual dependence often prevented conflict from spiraling beyond control. Survival depended on restraint as much as strength. Relations with the Strip were strained and asymmetrical. Freeside relied on proximity for survival, while the Strip relied on Freeside to absorb risk. This dynamic bred resentment and resignation in equal measure. Some residents sought integration, others rejection. Both responses reflected the settlement's liminal status. Despite its hardships, Freeside endured. Its population adapted to conditions that would have driven others away. Over time, networks of support formed, fragile but real. Clinics, soup kitchens, and community leaders emerged, mitigating suffering without eliminating it. These efforts demonstrated that even under exclusion, cooperation could persist. In the broader landscape of wasteland settlements, Freeside represents the cost of selective rebuilding. It shows how preservation for some creates abandonment for others, and how stability can coexist with neglect. Freeside did not collapse, nor did it flourish. It survived in between, shaped by proximity to power. It could neither access nor escape. Enduring as a reminder that civilization rebuilt unevenly leaves long shadows where others must live. The boomers chose isolation not as retreat, but as defense. Their settlement at Nellis Air Force Base emerged from fear hardened into doctrine, shaped by generations who learned that survival depended on distance from outsiders. Long before they fired their first artillery shell, the boomers inherited a lesson passed down through memory rather than history. Contact brought danger. Separation meant safety. Their origins trace back to Vault 34, a vault whose overcrowding fostered tension rather than cohesion. When its inhabitants eventually fled, They did not scatter widely. Instead, they moved together, carrying with them a shared trauma that reinforced unity. Their journey ended at Nellis, a military installation whose intact runways, hangars, and defensive infrastructure offered both shelter and deterrence. Where other settlements adapted ruins, the boomers occupied a fortress already designed for exclusion. From the moment they claimed the base, the boomers established a perimeter enforced by overwhelming firepower. Artillery batteries turned the surrounding desert into a killing field, ensuring that no approach went unchallenged. This aggression was not expansionist. It was preventative. The boomers had no interest in conquest, only in ensuring that no one reached them alive without permission. Life within Nellis was orderly and insular. Generations lived and died without seeing the wider Mojave. Children were raised on stories of betrayal and loss, taught that outsiders could not be trusted. Education focused on technical skill and communal responsibility. Every individual had a role, whether maintaining aircraft, repairing weapons, or supporting daily operations. Survival was collective, and deviation from doctrine was rare. Governance, among the boomers, was communal but rigid. Leadership rested, with elders whose authority came from experience and memory. Decisions prioritized continuity over innovation, preserving practices proven to protect the group. Change occurred slowly, often resisted, as tradition carried more weight than adaptation. Technological preservation defined the settlement's strength. The boomers maintained pre-war aircraft, artillery systems, and munitions long after others had forgotten their purpose. These machines were not symbols of power, but tools of survival. Their upkeep demanded expertise and discipline, reinforcing a culture that valued precision and routine. Economically, the boomers were largely self-sufficient. They produced little for trade and desired little from the outside world. This independence insulated them from regional instability but limited access to resources unavailable within their base. Scarcity was managed through rationing and careful planning rather than expansion. Culturally, the boomers viewed the wasteland through inherited caution. Outsiders were not enemies by nature, but unknowns to be eliminated before becoming threats. This worldview simplified decision-making, reducing moral complexity to clear boundaries. It preserved safety at the cost of understanding. When contact with the outside world eventually occurred, it challenged long-held beliefs. Cooperation revealed possibilities beyond isolation, exposing the limits of absolute separation. These encounters did not dismantle boomer identity, but they introduced tension between doctrine and experience. Trust, once dismissed entirely, became conditional rather than impossible. In the broader history of post-war settlements, the boomers represent survival through exclusion refined into culture. They demonstrate how fear, when sustained across generations, becomes identity. Their endurance proves that isolation can preserve life, but also that preservation carries the cost of stagnation. At Nellis, the boomers survived by turning away from the world, holding fast to the belief that safety lay not in rebuilding civilization, but in ensuring it never reached them again. Jacobstown formed where the wasteland's most feared inhabitants sought something unfamiliar. Rest. Tucked away in the mountains, far from major routes, the settlement emerged not through conquest or dominance, but through withdrawal. Supermutants, long associated with violence and instability, gathered here to escape a world that hunted them relentlessly. Jacobstown was not built to expand influence. It was built to survive quietly. Its origins lay in exhaustion. After decades of conflict with humans and other factions, some supermutants recognized that endless aggression offered no future. Under the guidance of leaders who retained clarity and restraint, they sought isolation over confrontation. The mountainous terrain provided natural defense, discouraging pursuit and reducing encounters with hostile groups. In this seclusion, Jacobstown took shape as a refuge rather than a fortress. Life in Jacobstown followed rhythms unfamiliar to most wasteland settlements. Super mutants did not farm or trade extensively. Their needs were simple, and their longevity reduced urgency. Days passed without clear distinction, measured by maintenance of shelter and care for the community's few human residents. Stability replaced urgency, allowing reflection where none had existed before. Governance was informal and rooted in respect rather than force. Leaders were followed because they offered protection and purpose, not because they dominated through strength. This marked a significant departure from typical super mutant hierarchies. Conflict still existed, but it was contained, addressed through mediation rather than violence whenever possible. The presence of human residents introduced complexity. Nightkin suffering from psychological deterioration sought treatment and understanding, blurring the line between monster and patient. Their inclusion challenged assumptions held by both humans and mutants, forcing re-evaluation of identity and worth. Jacobstown became a place of uneasy coexistence, bound by shared desire for peace. Culturally, Jacobstown represented an attempt at preservation rather than progress. Super mutants could not reproduce naturally, and many accepted that their kind would eventually fade. This awareness shaped behavior, fostering care rather than ambition. The settlement did not seek legacy through expansion, but through dignity in decline. Relations with the outside world were limited and cautious. Jacobstown avoided trade and contact, knowing that visibility invited violence. When interaction occurred, it was often tense, shaped by fear and misunderstanding. Despite this, Jacobstown's existence demonstrated that even those deemed irredeemable could choose restraint. In the broader wasteland, Jacobstown stands as a quiet anomaly. It reveals a side of survival rarely acknowledged, where endurance means stepping back rather than forward. Jacobstown did not challenge the wasteland's cruelty. It retreated from it, creating space for beings long denied peace, and in doing so, redefined what survival could mean at the end of the world. Brotherhood of Steel settlements emerged from conviction rather than geography. Wherever they established themselves, their presence reshaped the land into something resembling a fortress, reflecting a worldview built on preservation through control. These settlements were not designed to welcome civilians or foster trade. They existed to safeguard technology, enforce doctrine, and prepare for conflict in a world deemed incapable of managing its own creations. The origins of Brotherhood settlements traced back to remnants of the pre-war military. Bunkers, airfields, and research facilities became natural foundations, their reinforced structures aligning with the Brotherhood's emphasis on security. From these sites, the Brotherhood imposed order, sealing themselves off from the wasteland while projecting power outward. Access was restricted, membership tightly controlled, and purpose narrowly defined. Life within a Brotherhood settlement followed strict hierarchy. Rank determined authority, privilege, and responsibility. Initiates trained relentlessly, learning discipline and obedience before skill. Scribes preserved knowledge, cataloging technology salvaged from ruins. Knights maintained and deployed advanced weaponry, enforcing the Brotherhood's will beyond settlement walls. Every role served doctrine, reinforcing the belief that survival depended on mastery of the past rather than adaptation to the present. Technology defined Brotherhood culture. Pre-war weapons, armor, and machinery were not tools to be shared, but artifacts to be protected. Settlements functioned as vaults of knowledge, hoarding devices deemed too dangerous for general use. This isolation preserved technological capability, but fostered resentment among surrounding communities who saw the Brotherhood as withholding salvation. Governance was rigid and centralized. Decisions flowed downward through command structures, allowing swift response to threats but discouraging dissent. Doctrine replaced debate. Adaptation occurred slowly, constrained by reverence for established principles. While this rigidity preserved cohesion, It limited flexibility in rapidly changing environments. Interactions with civilians were transactional and often tense. Brotherhood settlements occasionally offered protection or assistance, but always at a cost. Technology was exchanged reluctantly, if at all. Civilians were viewed as potential liabilities, their ignorance seen as justification for exclusion. This dynamic reinforced separation, positioning Brotherhood settlements as isolated bastions rather than integrated communities. Militarization shaped daily life. Training drills, patrols, and maintenance consumed time and resources. Settlements existed in a state of readiness, anticipating conflict even during periods of calm. This vigilance preserved security, but also entrenched paranoia, narrowing focus to threats real or imagined. Despite their strength, Brotherhood settlements faced internal challenges. Rigid hierarchy stifled innovation, while ideological purity limited recruitment. Younger members questioned doctrine, seeking engagement rather than isolation. These tensions simmered beneath disciplined exteriors, occasionally erupting into schism or reform. In the broader wasteland, Brotherhood settlements represented survival through control of knowledge. They preserved fragments of the old world with meticulous care, believing themselves guardians against humanity's worst impulses. Yet their refusal to share often perpetuated suffering, raising questions about whether preservation without compassion truly served the future. Brotherhood settlements endured through strength and discipline, but their legacy remained contested. They stood as monuments to caution, reminding the wasteland that power could be protected but not easily justified. In guarding humanity's past, the Brotherhood isolated itself from humanity's present, surviving as watchful sentinels rather than participants in the slow rebuilding of civilization. Minutemen settlements emerged from an idea rather than a location. They were not bound to a single city or fortress, but scattered across the Commonwealth wherever people chose cooperation over isolation. The Minutemen believed that survival depended on neighbors defending one another, a principle that shaped every settlement they supported. Their communities were ordinary places, elevated by shared responsibility rather than extraordinary defenses. These settlements began as farms, homesteads, and small towns struggling to endure alone. Raiders, wildlife, and environmental hazards threatened them constantly. Without walls or advanced technology, survival required vigilance and mutual aid. The Minutemen offered structure without domination, organizing defense while allowing settlements to retain autonomy. This approach fostered trust, but relied heavily on participation rather than enforcement. Life in Minutemen-aligned settlements was defined by cooperation. Residents contributed to defense efforts according to ability, maintaining watch rotations, reinforcing structures, and sharing resources during crises. Unlike centralized powers, the Minutemen did not impose taxes or rigid laws. Support flowed through obligation rather than command, creating a network sustained by goodwill. Governance remained local. Settlements resolved disputes internally, calling upon Minutemen assistance only when threats exceeded capacity. This decentralization preserved independence but introduced inconsistency. Protection varied depending on leadership and preparedness. Some communities thrived, while others struggled despite affiliation. Communication formed the backbone of this system. Messengers and signals linked settlements, allowing rapid response to danger. Yet this reliance on coordination exposed vulnerabilities. When leadership faltered or communication broke down, the network weakened, leaving communities exposed. The Minutemen's greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. Their reliance on volunteers' limited scale and durability. Without centralized authority, recovery from loss was slow. When morale declined, the entire system suffered. Settlements depended not just on defense, but on belief in shared purpose. Despite setbacks, Minutemen settlements represented a rare expression of collective survival. They demonstrated that cooperation could replace domination, and that ordinary people could shape their own security. In a wasteland defined by extremes, Minutemen-aligned communities survived through balance, proving that civilization could be rebuilt not from monuments or machines, but from neighbors choosing to stand together. Appalachian settlements emerged earlier than most, rising in the uncertain years immediately following the Great War. In the hills and valleys of West Virginia, survival took shape before the world had fully understood it was broken. These communities did not rebuild from long silence. They responded in real time, adapting as systems failed and populations vanished, shaping settlements that carried the imprint of urgency rather than reflection. Many of these settlements relied heavily on automation. Pre-war emergency systems, robotic responders, and autonomous infrastructure continued functioning after human authority collapsed. Towns were maintained by machines programmed to serve communities that no longer existed. Survivors stepped into these spaces cautiously, inheriting routines without the people who had once given them meaning. Automation provided stability, but also masked loss, delaying the realization that no help was coming. Early Appalachian communities organized around resource extraction and logistics. Coal mines, factories, and research facilities provided shelter and equipment. These locations attracted survivors, seeking protection from the elements and access to supplies. Yet reliance on industrial sites exposed settlements to contamination and structural failure. When systems broke down, consequences were immediate and severe. Unlike later settlements shaped by long adaptation, Appalachian communities faced collapse repeatedly. Disease, environmental hazards, and internal conflict eroded populations faster than they could recover. Attempts at governance emerged and dissolved as leadership succumbed to exhaustion or isolation. Settlements became transient, their identities shifting as residents moved or vanished. The scorched plague marked a turning point. Communities that had survived radiation and scarcity found themselves facing an enemy that defied conventional response. Infections spread rapidly, turning neighbors into threats. Settlements collapsed not through invasion, but through fear and mistrust. Isolation replaced cooperation, accelerating decline. Despite these losses, Appalachian settlements left enduring traces. Automated messages, preserved facilities, and abandoned infrastructure became guides for later survivors. These remnants shaped how new populations approached rebuilding, offering lessons written in absence rather than success. In the broader history of post-war settlements, Appalachia stands as a record of immediacy. Its communities rose before ideology hardened, before traditions formed. They show survival stripped to reaction, revealing both humanity's resilience and its limits when catastrophe arrives without pause. Across the wasteland, there are places where settlement was attempted and then quietly abandoned. These are the failed towns and ghost communities, locations that once held hope before being reclaimed by silence. Their ruins do not mark sudden catastrophe, but gradual erosion. Each represents an answer that did not hold, a strategy for survival that collapsed under pressure rather than violence alone. Many of these settlements began with promise. Survivors gathered around water sources, defensible ruins, or remnants of infrastructure, believing that cooperation would be enough. In the early days, optimism lingered. Crops were planted, walls were raised, roles were assigned. For a time, life continued in patterns that felt almost familiar. Then the strain began to show. Environmental failure was the most common cause. Water sources dried or became contaminated. Soil failed after repeated planting without replenishment. Radiation storms shifted unpredictably, rendering previously safe ground lethal. Settlements built without redundancy discovered that a single failure could undo years of effort. When water pumps broke or generators failed, there was often no replacement, only the slow realization that staying meant dying. Isolation compounded these problems. Settlements that avoided trade and contact often did so for safety, but paid for it in scarcity. Without caravans or alliances, shortages could not be mitigated. A bad harvest or illness became existential threats. Over time, residents began to leave, first cautiously, then in waves. Those who remained found themselves surrounded by emptiness rather than community. Internal conflict accelerated collapse. Scarcity strained relationships, turning cooperation into competition. Leadership structures fractured as decisions grew more desperate. Accusations replaced dialogue. In some settlements, authority hardened into brutality. In others, indecision allowed problems to fester, trust eroded, and once broken, could not be repaired. People left not because they wanted to, but because staying meant enduring hostility from neighbors who had once been allies. Raider pressure finished what decay began. Failed settlements were vulnerable targets, their defenses weakened by loss and disorganization. Raiders exploited this weakness, extracting resources until nothing remained. In some cases, settlements survived as raider camps after original residents were driven off or killed. In others, the destruction was so complete that no one returned. Disease also played a quiet role. Without medical knowledge or supplies, minor illnesses became fatal. Outbreaks spread quickly in close quarters, forcing evacuation. Entire communities vanished not with screams, but with coughs and fevers that left buildings intact and streets empty. Some settlements failed because they were built on false assumptions. Pre-war structures that seemed durable collapsed unexpectedly. Vault-adjacent communities waited for doors that never opened. Others relied on technology they did not understand, unable to repair it when it failed. These places became monuments to misplaced trust in systems no longer supported by the world that created them. Ghost towns lingered in the wasteland long after abandonment. Their buildings remained standing, preserved by arid climates or lack of attention. Travelers passed through, scavenging what little remained. Stories accumulated around these ruins, warnings passed from caravan to caravan. Some believed the towns were cursed. Others saw them as reminders of how thin the line between survival and failure truly was. For later settlements, these ghost towns served as lessons. Survivors learned where not to build, which routes to avoid, and which mistakes could not be repeated. In this way, failed settlements contributed indirectly to the success of others. Their absence shaped future decisions more clearly than any surviving model. Yet not all ghost towns were failures in the same sense. Some were abandoned deliberately. Communities recognized that conditions had changed beyond recovery and chose to leave together. These migrations preserved lives, if not places. The empty towns they left behind stand not as symbols of defeat, but of restraint, proof that survival sometimes requires letting go. Emotion clung to these places. Those who passed through often felt a quiet weight, sensing the echoes of ordinary lives interrupted. A table still set, a bed left unmade. These details reminded travelers that failure was not abstract, it was personal, shaped by people who had believed, worked, and hoped. In the broader story of wasteland settlements, failed towns and ghost communities are as important as those that endured. They reveal the cost of miscalculation and the limits of resilience. They show that survival is not guaranteed by effort alone, and that the wasteland does not forgive repeated mistakes. These empty places do not accuse. They simply remain, scattered across the landscape, holding space for what might have been. In their silence, they teach the most enduring lesson of all, that rebuilding civilization is not a single triumph, but a continuous negotiation with forces that do not care whether humanity succeeds or fades away. Settlements, when viewed across the wasteland, reveal patterns that extend beyond geography or faction. Each one represents an answer to the same question, asked again and again in different ruins and landscapes. How should people live after the world has ended? The answers vary, shaped by fear, belief, memory, and environment. Yet they repeat in recognizable forms: order and freedom, isolation and cooperation. preservation, and adaptation. These themes echo through every surviving town and every abandoned ruin. Some settlements anchored themselves in the past, preserving fragments of pre-war civilization as closely as possible. Diamond City rebuilt civic life. Rivet City preserved systems. New Vegas maintained illusion through control. These places treated the old world as blueprint, believing stability came from restoration. Their success depended on structure and maintenance, and their failures often emerged where rigidity met change. Preservation provided continuity, but demanded constant effort and authority to sustain it. Other settlements rejected the past entirely. Raider camps, legion towns, and fractured urban zones abandoned pre-war ideals, embracing power or survival without moral constraint. These communities adapted quickly, but at the cost of long-term resilience. Violence sustained them in the short term, yet prevented growth beyond dominance. Their settlements burned bright and collapsed just as easily, repeating cycles rather than breaking them. Between these extremes lay communities shaped by belief. Megaton found meaning in danger. The Children of Atom built sanctuaries in radiation. Far Harbor accepted hostility as permanent condition. In these places, survival depended less on resources than on shared interpretation of reality. Belief created cohesion where logic alone might fail. Yet belief also limited adaptation, binding communities to narratives that could not always withstand change. Isolation emerged as both shield and prison. Vault City, the Boomers, and Jacobstown survived by turning inward, minimizing contact with an unpredictable world. Their settlements endured through control of boundaries, whether physical or ideological. Isolation reduced threat, but also limited growth, creating cultures that struggled when forced to engage beyond their borders. Safety was purchased at the price of stagnation. Cooperation offered another path. Shady Sands and the Minutemen settlements demonstrated how shared responsibility could scale beyond individual survival. These communities relied on trust and participation, building systems that extended protection outward rather than inward. Their fragility lay in dependence on morale and leadership. When belief faltered, so did structure. Yet when it held, cooperation achieved what force could not. Trade bound settlements together even when ideology divided them. The Hub, Canterbury Commons, and Freeside showed how movement of goods and information shaped survival as much as walls or weapons. These places thrived by facilitating exchange, allowing disparate communities to coexist without merging. Their vulnerability lay in dependence. When roots failed or demand shifted, their purpose eroded quickly. Hidden settlements told quieter stories. Railroad safehouses and institute-influenced towns existed in shadow, shaped by secrecy rather than permanence. Their impact was disproportionate to their size, altering lives without leaving visible marks. These communities demonstrated that influence did not require territory, and that survival could be achieved through invisibility as effectively as through strength. Across all of these, one truth remained consistent. Settlements were not defined solely by their structures, but by the choices made within them. Walls did not guarantee safety, belief did not guarantee unity, technology did not guarantee wisdom. Survival depended on alignment between values and reality, a balance rarely maintained for long. Time reshaped every settlement. What began as refuge became city. What began as ideology hardened into dogma. What began as cooperation sometimes dissolved into control. Even the most enduring settlements changed with each generation, their identities drifting as memory faded and necessity evolved. No settlement remained static. Those that survived did so by adjusting without abandoning themselves entirely. The wasteland remembered settlements differently than people did. To travelers, towns were resources, threats, or stories. To residents, they were homes shaped by routine and compromise. To history, they were experiments, each testing whether humanity could endure without repeating the mistakes that ended the world. Some experiments failed quietly, others succeeded temporarily. None provided final answers. What emerges from this mosaic is not a single model of survival, but a pattern of repetition. Humanity rebuilds using the same instincts it always has. It organizes, it excludes, it believes, it trades, it fights. The apocalypse stripped away certainty, but it did not erase human nature. Settlements became mirrors, reflecting the same desires and fears that shaped the old world, expressed through new constraints. In this way, settlements function as memory, even when people forget. A stadium becomes a city because crowds once gathered there. A vault becomes a nation because rules once governed survival. A ruin becomes a warning because hope once lived there. Every settlement carries echoes of what came before, whether it embraces or rejects that inheritance. The wasteland does not judge these places. It outlasts them. Towns rise and fall, walls crumble, beliefs fade, and new communities form among the remnants. What persists is the impulse to gather, to name a place as home, and to try again. Settlement by settlement, humanity continues this quiet negotiation with extinction. In the end, settlements are not about survival alone. They are about meaning. Even in a broken world, people seek structure, belonging, and purpose. They rebuild not because they believe they will succeed forever, but because living without trying feels worse than failure. The wasteland offers no guarantees, only space. Within that space, settlements continue to appear, each one a fragile statement that humanity, however changed, has not yet finished speaking. As the quiet settles over these places, the settlements remain, whether standing, abandoned, or remembered only through stories carried by travelers. Each one marks a moment when people chose to stay, to build, or to gather, even when the world offered no promise of reward. They simply made it livable, one fragile space at a time. Across deserts, ruins, and coasts, the pattern repeats. A shelter becomes a home becomes a community changes or disappears, leaving behind traces for others to find. None of these places were permanent, yet none were meaningless. They held lives, routines, arguments, hopes, and compromises, all unfolding quietly against a backdrop of radiation and ruin. What endures is not the settlement itself, but the act of settling. The instinct to gather, to name a place, and to shape it enough to last another day. Even as buildings collapse and borders fade, that instinct returns, again and again, wherever people survive. As you rest, let these places drift past without judgment. They are neither triumphs nor failures, only answers given in different voices to the same unending question: how to live after everything has already ended.